deserve this, brother.
Hey, we're back.
That song is always so catchy, man.
Justin Nipper. If anyone wants some help with their intro music on podcast, Justin Nipper is my guy. So we're back August of 1989, and you had told me before we recorded, there's nothing going on. It'll be a short show. And I think we've said that every single time we've done one of these. So we'll see if it's going to be short or not, because we always have a lot to talk about. But
Yeah.
so the main event is going to be SummerSlam. We'll talk about WWF first, and then there's a few things about the NWA, and then we'll close down with Only in the Observer, and then we'll talk a little bit about current wrestling, because I do want to get your thoughts on the all-out crazy-ass cage match that happened. And
Okay.
we'll save that.
Hated it.
We'll save that for the end. So did I. But let's get this kicked off here.
I did end up getting a couple questions in, but I'll just verbalize them to you. There's
okay.
only a couple of them, but I will do that later on.
I wanted to start this with somebody who started wrestling, when we were younger fans, and would wrestle into the late 90s and the early 2000s. The Dodger thing. Are you guys going to be able to win in the playoffs with no starting pitching? What's going on?
We'll see. It won't be my first heartbreak or my last. Like Bob from La Bamba says, right? Not my first or my last. So at this point, I have no expectations. I mean, when you've been a Dodger fan as long as I have, you just got to go into these postseasons and it is what it is. I mean, I
still want to record with you for the Giants podcast. During the playoffs or at the beginning of the playoffs might be a good time to do it. That would be fun.
There's going to be some tears. There might be some tears involved on my end. So I'm just warning you, because and that, you know what? As much as I've gone through the heartbreaks, it never gets easier. That's all I'll say about that.
I get it. I get it. Sid Vicious is who I was talking about, who passed away not that long ago and is right in the midst of the beginning of his career as a star. And I just wanted to get what would be your favorite Sid memory, or one of your few favorite Sid memories, because he was both a giant main eventer and he was also like a goofy dude who would screw up on promos.
Well, that was the thing. That was coming from the KLB, which was me and Danny's old show, Geekdom 101. That podcast was pretty much a tribute to the wackiness of wrestling, right? And so Big Sid, he was a big staple of that show, because he was a clumsy guy when it came to promos.
Yeah.
Sometimes when it came to his athleticism, and a lot of my memories of him stem from just how he would screw up. I remember one of the ones that comes to mind that not a lot of people know about it. It was from the March 97 Raw, where Bret Hart is starting that heel turn, right? A little bit before WrestleMania. I think it might have been the second or third Raw is War show, where they introduced the ramp and the big pyro and all that. And Bret Hart comes out and he's cutting a promo. I get disrespected. I should be the champ. And then right there, they put the screen on Big Sid, and as audible as you can on the USA Network at 9 p.m. He's like, I don't know shit, and he just the way he keeps the shit going for a long time, So I always marked out at that. Then there's a classic Jim Ross promo in '95, where he's like, I'm the ruler. Let's do this again. And then Jim Ross was like, we're live, pal.
Yeah.
And so there was that one. As far as
you want to know about that promo? Okay,
Which
for the longest time, the one you just said, the one where Jim Ross has to correct him because it's not a pre-tape.
Yes.
So for the longest time, I thought it was "We're live, pal," like you just said. But what Jim actually says is, "It's live, pal." And what's funny about that is, so we'll go back about 2.5 years. Tony the Leader, the guy who runs F4W.
Yes.
He wanted to create a new show, and Denise Salcedo, Andrew Zarian, and myself were the threesome that we had put together. And we were thinking of names. Observe This was one of the possible names. And when we
Right.
didn't pick that one, I kind of kept it for my own thing. But we used the name We're Live Pal because of that moment, not even thinking of going back to the JR clip to see what he actually said. But the reason is because the Young Bucks started doing that stuff on their that YouTube skit show that they would do. And
Right.
Matt Jackson would always say, "We're live, pal." So I just thought that's what it was. So our show on F4W that we've been doing for the last couple of years is actually named after what Jim Ross did not say, rather than what he did say.
Yes, you Mandela affected yourself, as we call
We
it.
did.
And so as far as him being like an actual, like a serious draw or whatnot, I mean, yeah, it's already been said. I mean, the guy had an incredible physique, right? Very, very unique genetics. I mean, he had a very thin waist with those big shoulders, and he was 6'5" or something. Really reminded me of a very young Adam Bomb, you know, Brian Clark, because he had the same freaky genetics too. Except Sid had charisma and Brian Clark did not. That was the only thing.
Yeah.
But Sid had that very unique charisma. You know how they always say that charisma comes in different ways, right? Which is something that for a long time the wrestling promoters, not the wrestling promoters, more so Vince, just couldn't really comprehend. I mean, it wasn't always nobody's gonna be The Rock and nobody's gonna be Hulk Hogan, and it seems like he was very rigid in what he saw as a star. Anyways, Sid had a very unique charisma in that he wasn't the best promo, but there was something about him that was very intimidating, you know. So I was watching in '89 when he came up with, and they put him with the skyscrapers.
Mm-hmm.
But with him it was weird because, you know, we joked that, I think it was last episode, we joked that he could never build momentum because he would always get hurt or he would always go play softball in the summer, which wasn't a joke. And so I think his legacy was definitely affected by that, and he was a kind of an asshole in real life, from what everybody says.
I have a question for you on the softball thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he played softball just because he was kind of like an undisciplined guy who kind of, you know, he just went by his own thing, or do you think that was his way of showing like, yeah, you promoters want me, and I'm going to show you I can leave on my own, and I'm going to come back, and you're going to still kiss my ass? Like, why do you think he did that? What was the strategy, or was there any strategy?
I like how none of your options are that he actually enjoyed playing softball. Like that was.
Well, you could enjoy playing softball, but it is an undisciplined thing to leave your job to go do that.
Yes, correct. And I do think that at that time, I mean, he was a huge commodity, right? I mean, he was a very unique character. And there was when you have the big two, he was always going to find a place to work. I don't think he really sweat, because even besides the softball, he always got in trouble. You know, we have the Arn Anderson incident. He would leave Vince from time to time, so he would always get in trouble, and he just didn't care. It almost seemed like he had softball there to get him through the hard times, and then he would always come back to a big payday. So I think the fact that he knew he had leverage just because of how he looked. And because he was also very young, he was one of those guys that got the push very young, so he was very undisciplined as well. So it was a combination of both of your options, I think.
I've said this before, and I'll say it again here, but 1991, when he leaves WCW after the very first Super Brawl, he's supposed to face El Gigante in the stretcher match.
Right.
He doesn't even get on the stretcher. It's like the worst job that anyone has ever done in wrestling.
I think Hercules Hernandez paid him back at the Garden. That was the worst job I've ever seen. Have you seen that one?
I don't think I've seen it.
In January '92, he wrestles Hercules Hernandez right after the Royal Rumble. Hernandez takes the power bomb. He gets pinned. He gets up and he walks out of the ring. And that was the last night in the territory for Hercules.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, and it was to Sid of all people. But I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
What happens is I'm listening to a cable radio show, and the guy is from actually probably not too far from you, and he was doing a show out of Slammer's Gym. So it was like some wrestling school, and they did shows. It was called Slammers. His name was Dynamite D. Yes. And he passed away only a couple years ago because Dave.
No, it's been longer than that. I knew him.
Did you know Dynamite D?
Yeah, Yeah, he's a legend here in Southern California.
Okay. I've
He
not
did.
been able to find a lot of information on him or on those shows because basically what here now let me tell you how hooked on wrestling I was at how old would I have been, like 15 years old,
CRN
14,
radio, baby.
14
I
years
was
old.
there with you.
Right. So there were 2-hour blocks twice a week, and I would literally sit in front of the TV, and that we had our cable access channel, so it was a blue screen with white font, and it would just endlessly scroll like the same thing over and over and over. But in the background, you had the audio of Dynamite D's pro wrestling show. So I'm assuming, I don't know this for a fact, but now as an adult thinking back, I'm assuming he like maybe he had a couple sources, but he's probably reading the Observer.
Hmm.
And he has this radio show, and he is mentioning that Sid is leaving WCW and heading to WWF. And I was so locked in to the pro wrestling, the business aspect of it. Now, I'd read about it before. Dave Meltzer's writing in the National. I have access to that stuff, the first insider kind of stuff. Then Dynamite D is right after that. And then when Flair leaves and Dynamite D had that, and Meltzer had it, everyone had it, months before it actually happened.
Hmm.
I was just like, this is the most amazing thing in the world. I just want to get as close to this stuff as possible. And you and I have had this conversation. That is kind of what saved me as a wrestling fan once I stopped being a teenager and became a young adult and had more responsibility. Because a lot of people fall out of wrestling around that time. And I
Yeah.
think I would have fallen out if I didn't have the Observer or if I didn't have stuff that kind of sucked me in like Dynamite D. But if I think about the time frame, it's right when Sid bounces because that's when I find Dynamite D's radio show. And I was just in awe watching this blue screen and listening to this man talk about stuff that I had no idea was coming.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same thing with me, although I was a little younger than you. And then later on, which you probably stopped listening to it later on. Later on, he was replaced by a guy called the Shadow Man.
So this is my buddy Mike Gilbert, who grew up in SoCal as well. He actually interviewed the Shadow Man like last year sometime.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, he had him on his show. So yeah, like this is crazy stuff for us dudes in our 40s. But
Yes.
yeah, that was like how we got information back then, and I'm just amazed because you, me, my buddy Mike Gilbert, John LaRocca, all found this random ass cable radio news channel and sat in front of a TV with no moving picture to listen to radio.
No, yeah, it was awesome. It was one of my first introductions to like non kayfabe wrestling news, and that's probably how I found the Observer. Because I found the Observer in '96, so that was around that time. Um, but yeah, Dynamite did pass away. He passed away about 10 years ago.
Oh, is that what it was?
And Pro Wrestling Guerrilla actually has their annual tag team tournament was named in his honor. The Dynamite D, they had a wacky name for it, but that was their tag team tournament. And I actually got to talk to him a few times because he would hang out. The precursor to Pro Wrestling Guerrilla would have been there was another promotion called AWS that I found.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were all California guys that would kind of hang out, try to get booked. And then he was also in XPW, I believe, in the early days as well. So yeah, so he was around for a while. But to your point, yeah, that CRN radio, knowing about Sid and all that stuff was wild. But yeah,
what
Sid didn't
was
even do the
what
job
was
right.
Slammers like? Slammer, like how long
Slammers
did it
was a gym.
exist?
It was a
Yeah,
gym.
it was like a
Yeah.
school. Was it, or did they
Yes.
just have shows?
They had shows for their students, but it was
Okay.
primarily the Slammers gym.
And
Yeah.
was he one of the trainers or like who else?
He was
trained?
one of the students and trainers. Yeah, he was a
Okay.
student trainer. Which for the people that don't know, a lot of these like wrestling schools, they have the students train people. Like once you get to a certain stage in your development, you get to train other people, which is why a lot of like professionals think it's a little bit of a scam. You want to get somebody with a name in there with you or whatnot. But yeah, that's what Slammers was. It was a school, primarily a school.
That's my one. If I could write a feature it would be on Dynamite D, because it's just something that is in my memory that very few people know about. It's almost like, you're one of the only people who were in this thing at this time. But the other thing is, like, I've tried to find some of those old shows like on YouTube and stuff, and I can't find anything.
Yeah.
Any of those old shows that, from back then. I guess you would have to. Yeah, I mean, it's just like if you taped them, if you videotaped, because that's what I would do. Like, if we went on vacation, I would set the VCR for that time. And the reason why I stopped listening is because I think they switched the cable radio news channel to something else at some point, and then I didn't know how to find it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
When we're that age, everything's in the moment, right? It's like our
yeah.
attention span could be redirected very suddenly. You probably got to engage in other sports, or there's girls and all that stuff. So yeah, there's reasons why we stop listening or watching this stuff sometimes.
So, do you think, now we're not talking about 1992, but 1992 is kind of where the wheels fall off for WWF. And you would think that if anybody could not replace Hulk Hogan, but could kind of be a nice person to pass the torch to, it could be Sid Vicious, because of how he looked, because of his charisma, all the things that we just said. Now there's the other part of it, which is the steroid stuff, and he fails that steroid test right before WrestleMania.
Right.
But you would think that, a lineup, if Hogan is gone, a lineup of the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, Sid, Randy Savage, Roddy Piper, you think you'd be in good hands, but the business falls off so fast, and none of those guys are even the chosen one by the end of that year. It just seems like if you ran that again in some sort of algorithm of 1992, like almost every single time you run it, you almost feel like they should have been better off, but they were not.
I think there was a lot of mistakes done. So I think in a perfect world, and not even that perfect world, I think just in a world of a couple of better decisions here and there, we would have had a different business. First of all, Sid getting fired during the European tour, and forcing Papa Chongo to headline against Warrior, that had an impact on the business. But also something that nobody ever talks about is Randy not chasing Flair really impacted business. I think, and we found out this in '96, right? In '96 in WCW, when Randy was chasing Flair, it picked up the house show business tremendously, right? That was kind of like the first sign of life for WCW with the house show business, and actually with popularity in general. So I think had Flair kept the belt and Savage would have been chasing him throughout the spring and into the summer, I think it would have been a different business. I think it would have drawn more money. But the New York territory wasn't ever like that, right? The New York territory had the baby face, always the champion, and you feed them heels. It didn't have that Southern mentality of like the heel always wins, but also puts over the baby face, and that's where the money's at. So had Sid stayed clean, right, and had Flair kept the title, I think they would have stayed. Their business would have been a lot healthier, because at that point Brett was on fire already. He wasn't a main event guy yet, but he was getting there. Roddy Piper, if you remember, he left after WrestleMania anyway. He would be done by then. But still, they had enough star power there to where they could have made a go of it in a better way than what ended up actually happening.
Yeah. All right, let's move along to August of '99, and we'll talk about WWF first. So we talked about the Saturday night's main event, which is coming back. By the way, I'm sure you saw that little a little thing about it.
I hope Jesse LaMine is not actually gonna be a commentator, because that would be very bad.
People keep telling me that, and I'm like, how is he gonna do it? He has no idea what's going on. Like,
I think he's just gonna be an interviewer. I hope so anyway. But I don't think they put him in there as a Plus, the team is Vince and Jesse. You can't. It's pointless to have Jesse with fucking Joel, whatever his last name is,
Joe Tessitore.
which by the way, he's really good. By the way, I mean, It's my ignorance that I can't remember his last, or I can't say his last name, but he's actually a really good announcer. But they're not gonna put him with him or with Corey Graves or Michael Cole. You know, they come. Vince and Jesse come as a team. If you can't have one, don't put the other one in there. So I think if anything, he's gonna just do a couple interviews here and there for the nostalgia, and that's it.
He could also call the main event with the guys if just to get that familiar voice or whatever if they wanted to do that.
But it would have to be a 3-man team just so that
totally.
You don't want him to carry or be the play-by-play guy. But yeah.
So Saturday Night main event, the last one, it was Hogan and Honky, and we were talking about the guitar shot. And this actually gives Hogan a pinched nerve, and he actually has to miss some houses because of the guitar shot. And, you know, at some point, Honky's hurting all these dudes. At what point do they just gimmick the guitar or take it? You can't take it away from him because that's his whole thing. But, man, this dude is putting people out with this guitar thing that, you know, it's just a spot. It's not like an important thing. But can we get like some paper mache guitars? What's going on here?
I don't think at that time they even thought of that kind of stuff, you know, to be honest with you. But I don't think he used it again after Hogan. If I can't think of any time where he would use it again, and he would only be in the company for about another year and a half. But yeah, he wouldn't use it. Oh yeah, no, actually they used it on the Bushwhackers. You know what? I take it back. During the build-up to that SummerSlam, WrestleMania 6 run-in when they're singing the Honka Honka Honky Love. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I take it back. But the Bushwhackers were crazy anyway, so they probably took it on gimmick. They didn't care.
Yeah.
But you're right, man. I mean, this guitar slaying people out is you know, sending Jake Roberts on the road to addiction, according to him. And just yeah, it's creating a lot of chaos. Savage ate it. He didn't get hurt, but you know, he was one of the only ones.
In SummerSlam, which we'll talk about in a little bit, Jimmy hits Honky with it because Dusty moves out of the way, but this guitar does not break. So Jimmy was light on the shot because it did not break over Honky's head.
Yeah, they're friends, so he probably told them, hey, don't add me to the list, you know?
We had talked about the Bobby Heenan show, and Meltzer's very interested because he's a Heenan fan.
And aren't we all? That's all I got to say.
No, yeah, absolutely. But he was invested in the idea of this show. I don't think he thought it was going to work, but I think he did get a kick out of it in some ways. So he wrote very early in the month, don't expect the show to last more than a few weeks. USA hated it at first and wanted to pull it, but Vince talked them out of it. And then the next week, he wrote, the Heenan show drew a 3.7 rating, which would make it one of the 2 or 3 highest rated shows of the week on cable. USA had wanted it off the air immediately. And the second show also saw TV sets turn off from the primetime lead-in. But on the third week, they did not. I think they actually beat the rating. Bobby Heenan show beat the rating of primetime wrestling, which preceded it, which was kind of weird. Ratings can be funky like this, but I wonder what was on that third show that caused people to keep tuning in.
That was probably the Heather Hunter episode, which got covered here, right?
That would make sense.
Which got covered in the Observer. I saw. We talked about it last month, but we finally got to it here. He does say that a porn star was in the Bobby Heenan show, you know, and she did a lap dance on him. Which was so weird. Like even when you watch it today, it's on YouTube. It's like it's so it doesn't jive with the world they were trying to introduce, especially with the kids and stuff. But she was
Howard
there,
Stern. So. I'm sure they were somewhat trying to mimic what Howard Stern was doing back then.
Yeah, that's true. That would be 89. Yeah, that was around that time.
Yeah. In the house show business of WWF. What they do is they're trying to get the Ultimate Warrior over before SummerSlam, before his match with Rick Rude, and they're having Andre be the one to put him over. But Andre's not moving great. He's not going to have a long match, as we'll talk about in SummerSlam. He's struggling just getting over that top rope at this point. So what do? Well, they have it as the main event, and they have Warrior beat him in like 15 seconds, which pisses off all of these people who paid
Okay,
for good
I got something
tickets.
to say about this. I got
Okay.
something to say because I know Dave. I know Dave's writing. I know Dave's taste. I do wonder. This is where you have to be very careful with the custodians of history. I do wonder how much of that is true because
Mm-hmm.
I do wonder if that's Dave being upset because that's how Dave is when he doesn't get his match quality, and he tends to really just assume the population's reaction is the same as his. He's done that quite a bit.
Or
Um,
not only just the same as his, but the same as his readership, which is also a very niche
Correct.
of the industry.
Correct. Thank you for that, and that is a correction. And you're right. It's more like that because I also know the WWF fan base of this time, and they don't care about that stuff. They care about now. I will say that they might be upset that they only got the Warrior character for a few
Mm-hmm.
seconds, right? That could be a reason to be upset, and that I would believe. But this idea that we're getting 15-second matches, they don't care about that. They don't care about 15-second match, but they do care about how long the Warrior's out there, and they want to see him for longer than 15 seconds. So yeah, I could see how the fan base would get upset. Did they riot or whatnot? No. I mean, Warrior and Andre still drew around the horn. I mean, they were still drawing money, whether they were going 15 seconds or 30 seconds. So I do question that, but it just depends what the argument is. Is it that they're not getting the Warrior for longer than 15 seconds, or does the match suck? If the match sucks, they don't care. If it's the Warrior, then they do care. So that's kind of where I am on that. Now, I will say this. Vince, you could tell, right? You could tell right there that Vince never cared about the actual professional wrestling, the match quality. He never did, even up to this day when he was last in charge. Maybe a little bit because he had more guys that were more influential, younger wrestlers that had retired that were in his ear that were more about match quality. But Vince was always the showman. He wanted the entire show to look good, right? And he was about characters and getting over the characters and then merchandising them. So this is a great example because he never wavered. He never changed the lineups. The entire tour continued to be the same, even though they were getting these so-called negative reactions at all the houses. So it goes to show you that Vince didn't care about that.
The other thing, and we see this today in the wrestling reaction and the commentary, is if you don't like the other side, you are finding opportunities to nitpick the other side. So if you're an NWA fan at this point and you're hearing about these house shows where the Ultimate Warrior and Andre the Giant, not only is that a bad wrestling matchup for an NWA fan, but then you go, oh, and then they're ripping fans off by only having the main event go 15 seconds. And we see this in the AEW and the WWE commentary today. There's anything that comes up that is negative towards one company, the other side is going to jump on it and magnify it and say, see, these are bad people. And then it happens the other way as well. Like that's the one thing that it kind of it not that it really drives me nuts because I'm so off of Twitter and I'm outside. I don't go on message boards anymore. I kind of have my own little Discord where we chit chat. But when I see someone who I think is like a pretty smart wrestling fan jump into that tribalism boat, I go, oh, I just wish that people would stop doing that. But that's kind of the thing right now with wrestling, with politics. It's like,
But we're all a part of it because even today, going back to Big Dave, it's like, Big Dave made that post about how like nobody's jumping on SmackDown for the overrun, right? But everybody talks shit about AEW because of their overruns. And to me, it's like, why is that necessary? Why there was absolutely no reason to initiate that post, because Dave, he doesn't typically start these fights, but that was one where he posted it, and then it was like he got a lot of like negative feedback, and it was like everybody gets caught up in this. It's not about being smart, or I think once there's an emotional component, people pick a side. It's human nature. And so, yeah, I mean, that's where we're at. I don't play that. I mean, again, I love both companies. I count my blessings. I'm very fortunate that I'm living in a time where we have two companies that I consider them, are firing on all cylinders. AEW has been really good of late as well, but not everybody sees it like that, unfortunately.
So Dave also writes that WWF is adding a 5th pay-per-view show for 1989 in late December. And this is before SummerSlam. He will have a different opinion on this after SummerSlam is over. But he believes Hogan and Zeus will headline. He as he learns more, and that's kind of the fun thing about these observers, is because they're weekly and because he can't actually publish information right away. You kind of see the story of the story change and grow,
Right.
and he adds more things. At this point, he's like, oh, 5th pay-per-view, it's going to be Hogan and Zeus. And this is, I imagine his thinking is this will set up WrestleMania for Hogan and Zeus. And so what we do learn, and we've talked about this before, is that the match and the movie combined pay-per-view. And there was also talk of, have you ever seen any of the other matches on that card?
No, I've only seen that one. Oh no,
I've
I
only
take it
seen
back.
that much too.
I take it back. They also had the Rick Rude, Roddy Piper steel cage blow off.
Okay.
During that show, and that was released in one of the Coliseum videos later on, but it was on that night.
Got it. So the original, as he's getting information, it sounds like Hogan and Zeus, and then there's going to be other matches added to this pay-per-view. And then he writes later that they might actually pre-tape it because Zeus is such a bad wrestler that they're worried that he wouldn't be able to do a live match. And then as the story goes on, it's like, it's really about selling the pay-per-view version of the movie and trying to enhance the buys by also having a match with the 4 of them. So it's kind of a fun little wrinkle to what they were doing. But by that point, by December, and we'll get there at the end of this series, that feud is on its last legs for sure.
Yeah, and they would never even have the one-on-one match. They never even had it. They would send them back to wherever he came from, after that steel cage match, and then Hogan would start his program with Perfect. So that was that.
All right, SummerSlam. Do you remember these shows being on Monday nights and not on the weekends?
Yeah, SummerSlam specifically. SummerSlam was always a Monday show for a long time, and it would suck because during the 90s you couldn't get. There was no post Raw, the post pay-per-view Raw. You had to wait till the following week because Raw was always, the SummerSlam was always on Mondays. What they did have that was pretty cool. On Sundays they would have like the Road to SummerSlam, or it was like SummerSlam Heat or whatever, and it was competitive matches. I think it was about an hour and a half on USA. And it was cool because it was like a mini pay-per-view, because at that time we wouldn't get competitive matches on TV. So you would get the Road to SummerSlam on Sunday, and then you would get SummerSlam on Monday. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, I remember the Monday pay-per-views for sure.
So Dave writes later after the show is over, he wrote that the USA Network didn't run a primetime wrestling head-to-head against SummerSlam, unlike TBS, which has run its regularly scheduled TV shows head-to-head with its Sunday pay-per-views. I always thought that was funny too.
Well, one of the things that we forget, and I forgot myself to bring this up in earlier shows. This is still very much in the infancy of a national company, and so they're still figuring it out. I mean, we're seeing some of these loops where they would fly into Chicago, and then the next night they had a show in Miami, then the next night in LA. That was, to me, is like, that's how much money did the company waste on these plane tickets? When they could have just established the loop a lot earlier. They wouldn't establish the actual loop. For the people that don't know what the loop is, it's just essentially you fly into the big market, and then you start going to the little markets that are close by, and then you finish up in another big market for TV. And that didn't come in till 94 as a cost-cutting measure, and then they ended up liking it, and they stayed with it till now, really. And so I think a lot of the trial and error was really felt for, I would say, the first 5 years of the expansion, right, of the national expansion. And one of those things, even for the NWA, was like the pay-per-view business. Like, how do you deal when you have a pay-per-view and you have a television show where you just kind of run them both and hope for the best, you know? There wasn't this idea like we see a lot of with AEW now of moving shows around and trying to fit that schedule so you don't compete with yourself. But with all that said, there's also a lot of incompetence because they did throw on the wrong tape, which we're going to get to later on.
We'll get to that.
For a particular TV. So,
and anyways, the rating was fine for the rerun.
Right.
It was funny.
Right. But I think there's more to be said about this story. As far as them trying to figure it out, I think Vince gets a lot of flack for a lot of the vices that were picked up on the road by the wrestlers, a lot of the early deaths that we had, very young wrestlers of this era. But everybody was trying to figure it out. Like Vince, he had an idea, right? The broad strokes, but he didn't really know how to make this work yet. And so we see in hindsight, we see a lot of little things that make us laugh, or that we say, why would they do it this way? It doesn't make any sense. Remember, folks, this was at a time where they had to actually bicycle. Yeah, they would hire carriers to deliver the tapes to the station so they could put it in the machine and play it. So there's a lot going on here still where they're trying to learn how to do it the right way, and they wouldn't really perfect it. So I would say like 1991, you know? So anyways.
All right, SummerSlam, the dark match. Dino Bravo beats Coco Beware.
Coco Beware was in a lot of these dark matches.
The actual start of this show, I thought was really interesting because the first two matches feature talent that is more known by working for the competition than for WWF. The Brainbusters are in the opening match against Hart Foundation. Dusty Rhodes is in the second match against the Honky Tonk Man. And you could even go one further. The UWF guy, Terry Taylor, against the AWA guy, Mr. Perfect. So it's just interesting because, you know, one of the cool things about 89 was some of the NWA talent moving to WWF to be given a little bit of a fresh look. Now, they don't really stick around that long, much like Ric Flair 2 years later. He's not around for that long. But I just thought it was kind of interesting that, though, you know, you do have NWA talent in the first two matches of this big summer pay-per-view.
And it shows in the first match because that's a really good match. It shows that Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard were there to work. They were the workhorses of that year. They were there from 88 to 89. Yeah, about 1 year. And it was a really good match. Now, the second match, I don't think I've ever seen a match, dude, where Dusty, I think in every single spot of the match, exposes the business. I was kind of like, I was amazed and bewildered and everything. I was like, every single spot he becomes a cartoon character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's doing this with the hands and grabbing his crotch, and there wasn't one spot of offense where where it looked real. I mean, and then Honky's always been a cartoon character, right? So that match, I mean, for what it was, I mean, I like that stuff, but I could see like the Meltzerites not really being happy with it. But it was just a lot. Like I knew Dusty was not like that in the NWA matches. Like he was literally just out there exposing the business with every single move he did.
Yeah, and his crutch in the NWA was bleeding, and you can't bleed in Vince McMahon's WWF. So that was one thing.
Do you remember that spot where he grabs Honky's laid down on the floor and he grabs his foot, and then he starts like dancing, and then he starts doing this, and then all he does is this. He literally just bends the foot like how it's supposed to go, by the way. And that was it. But the people ate it up. They were like, yeah, you know. But it was just ridiculous. I'm looking at it like, this guy. This is 1989, folks. And the thing is, for all the people that always say, oh, did people know it was fake in the 30s and the 20s? Yes, they knew, because we also had characters like that in the undercard. And so people have always been very smart as far as what this is, and that is not in the up and up. You know, but man, seeing Dusty in 1989, it was like, yeah, people had to know, you know. And that was the year where Vince, I think, said that it was all a work anyway, like officially. I think it was 89.
Yeah.
But if he hadn't, Dusty showed us.
Yep. All right. So then the next match, Mr. Perfect and Terry Taylor. I didn't realize that he blew out his knee in this match.
Yeah, he blows out his knee about 2 minutes into the match because he's trying to body slam Perfect, and then they freak out, and then Terry just goes, "Let's go home," but you can't. That's not audible on the network version, and then he just randomly gets him in the Perfect Plex, and then the match is over.
Yeah.
And Big Dave is very disappointed. I could almost guarantee you. I didn't go ahead, but I could almost guarantee you that in the next issue, Dave's gonna tell us that he blew out his knee.
Okay. You know, I've been meaning to ask him, and I always forget to ask him when I have the chance about why they even signed Taylor if they were only going to treat him as like a glorified enhancement talent, because the Terry Taylor from the UWF was a much bigger star. And when he comes over to Vince, he's a cartoon character, but he's almost like a cartoon character. It's almost like Vince is punishing him for something. And I wondered if they're like, why did the Rooster character look so, it just looked like a defiant Vince thing versus anything that was ever going to be business for them.
Well, according to Bruce Pritchard, which, he said that when they first met Terry for the initial meetings to bring him in, he would walk around like he was the cock of the walk. You know what I'm saying?
Peacocking.
Yes, and Vince didn't like that. Vince felt that he was above everyone, so Vince gave him that gimmick, and Vince had that kind of power, right? I mean, he had that power where he could bring guys in just to humiliate them. But I don't think that was the initial idea. I think because Terry Taylor also has a reputation of being a stooge and just kind of like not being well liked.
There's something in the Observer about that Terry Taylor really didn't have any opportunities at the NWA. So he did something to, ruin his opportunity there. So he really only had WWF, and thus he had to do what they wanted.
Right. But it also seems like Terry was very good at self-sabotaging. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm.
Like it seems to me, and even like, and Bruce even said like that Red Rooster gimmick, and we've seen this done before. It's like that trial by fire, right? And then if you get through it, then they'll change it, and then they'll give you like a push. And we've seen a lot of guys come in with ridiculous gimmicks, Steve Austin being one of them.
Yeah.
And if you play if you pay your dues and you play a good little soldier, which is fucked up as it is, for Vince to do stuff like that, but he does it. If you play the game, you're gonna get a shot, if he likes you. So, but for what I understand, Terry Taylor he always had attitude, and he never liked the gimmick, and he was only around for about a year and a half. And then he went back to WCW, but then they gave him worse gimmicks. Or not worse gimmicks, but just bad gimmicks.
Yeah.
And he was never able to leave the shadow of the Red Rooster. But that was his story, yeah.
The next match is like secretly my favorite match on the show. It's I would be the first person to kind of be like, oh, I hate this kind of booking where you just take a heel and you put them with another heel, and then you just put the people who they're facing. Like there's no real connected story. Like today, I would kind of be against that kind of booking, but on this show, I loved it because it was Rick Martell and the Rougeos against Tito Santana and the Rockers, and the Rougeos are just so over the top as heels. They're so entertaining. Rick Martell has not fully gone over the top that he would become with the model and all that stuff, but he's kind of leaning, he's kind of getting there. And it's really fun stuff. And I always loved Tito because Tito was always the sympathetic babyface. But post 85, he's the sympathetic babyface who you want to win, who never wins.
Never wins.
And then, you really see Shawn Michaels in this match. Just kind of, you're like, oh, the Shawn's kind of kicking it into gear here. So this is a really, really fun match.
Yeah, and it also looks like they got a little more time because the previous one went short. So it's a long match. It's like a 17-minute match or something like that. And of course, Jesse reminds us that because the three are French Canadian, the heels, right? So they could communicate in French, whereas Tito and the Rockers can't communicate in Spanish. And I'm like, that's such a stereotype. And a couple of other little side notes of this little feud there. Like you said, they weren't really feud. I mean, Tito and Rick were feuding, and the Rockers and the Luchas were feuding, but the six men were not feuding.
Yeah.
Which is again, to give some parallels of today, AEW does that a lot, where they just
they overdo it. I think
they just put these random matches, and then it's like there's no story. Even on pay-per-views, as we saw with the last pay-per-view on the 0 Hour, there was a bunch of matches that with random guys that had no history. But anyways, and at the house shows, I feel bad for Tito because Rick was winning that feud, that Strikeforce breakup. Like Tito wouldn't even win at the house shows where they put all the babyfaces over.
Yeah.
Rick was winning by holding the tights. And then another interesting fact about the house shows around this time were that the Rujos and the Rockers were having these 60-minute matches every night, 45 to 60 minutes. Now, if it is the Rujos that we saw on TV, that sounds like unbearable. Like it's all stalling. It's all, Jacques Rougeau doing the fake handshake gimmick. But from what I understand, they actually kicked it into gear and they actually gave us some good matches. I need to find some fan cams or some house show footage of that because I would like to see those Rockers Rujos 45-minute matches at the house shows. But yeah, that was interesting, man. And so here they just matched them all up, like whatever. They would do that again with Hacksaw and Demolition against the Twin Towers and Andre. And it was what it was. This was a very fun match. This was not my favorite match on the card. That would be Rick Rude and Warrior for me.
Okay, so let's talk about that. This match has like long ref bump stuff and both guys getting the phantom pin, and then you have the interference with Roddy Piper, and that's the reason why Roode loses the match. But there's also Ultimate Warrior has this dude in a press slam and drops him like a sack of shit right on his face. Holy cow. And Roode is historically great bumper, probably to his demise, to his detriment. And, as Big Dave called him, Rick the Stick, there wasn't a lot of meat on those bones. There's a lot of lean muscle mass.
Yes.
So this dude is just ping-ponging around for the Ultimate Warrior. I felt so bad. This is so long ago. But my goodness, he was just doing whatever it took to make Warrior look like, the best version you could possibly find, but he had to have been hurting after this match.
Hell yeah, you could tell. But also Rick Rude's a good seller. Like seeing him take those turnbuckles and seeing his facials on that. So it's a combination of him being a good seller, but I'm sure Warrior beat the heck out of him, and also but what makes this more frustrating is the fact that Warrior is so like he doesn't even know. It almost seems like he doesn't know the favor that Rick Rude's doing for him to try to make him. He just doesn't care. He's so careless with his body and just the way he throws them around and stuff.
Isn't this the same criticism that people would give Bill Goldberg? 10 years later or eight years later.
Yeah, it is. A lot of people. Ahmed Johnson. There's been a few of them. And Nia Jax. And you go. Let's go through that list. So this is Warrior was just careless, but somehow Rick Rude was able to make it a good match. My favorite match of the night. It starts the Rick Rude Roddy Piper feud that we're going to December. That really brought Piper back into the house shows and whatnot. Although he had covered for Jake, right?
Yeah,
he had covered for Jake, and then Dusty covered for Jake. But yeah, so this was my favorite match of the night. Really good match, just different, For all the Warrior carelessness, it made it into a unique spectacle to watch this match.
It felt dangerous watching it in 2024. I'm like thinking that Rick Rude's gonna break his neck in this match, and knowing that it doesn't happen. But man, that Rick Rude did a great job. You mentioned this one. Hacksaw and Demolition against Andre and the Twin Towers. What did they have the heel side of the team at? Almost like 1,400 pounds of weight on that side. This match was not good. There was no attempt for this match to be good. Jim
I don't
Duggan
think
had
I don't
his
think Andre ever tags in, right? He's always on the outside. They get him involved, but he never officially goes into the match because he can at this point. He's just all
yeah.
banged up.
Yeah, he's all banged up. It is really sad to watch him try and get over that top rope. And but yeah, I mean, the less we say about this match, the better. But it was one of those matches where, when I'm sure you put it together just because of the insanity of one team being these three giant dudes, and then the babyface, the Demolition are tough guys, and Hacksaw's a tough guy. So that's the idea. But yeah, the match was really bad. But the babyfaces won. I hadn't watched this show in a while, and I was pretty sure the babyfaces won. But still, when they did win, I was kind of surprised.
Yeah, but this show's pretty cool in that it has a nice little balance of heels and babyfaces winning throughout the night. I like that.
My least favorite storyline in WWF at this time. I wonder if it was my least favorite back then too. But this whole Greg Valentine and Ronnie Garvin as the ring announcer, and Valentine.
My God.
Yeah, Valentine wins the match by cheating. Ronnie Garvin is.
But let's talk about the ring announcer. The worst diss in the history of this is he's got it's not even as bad as dad jokes. They're just horrendous.
Yeah.
Because you could tell that they give rugged Ronnie Garvin the task of coming up with jokes, and he probably waited till 2 minutes before he went out there, and he had nothing. He was making fun of his gear, which was dumb. He was making fun of he's 270 pounds and about 30 pounds overweight, and that's supposed to be the joke, and it's the worst, just embarrassing. And he's dying out there, and the crowd is not reacting, and he's got the wacky accent, and it's just a mess. It's a mess.
What if he would have ended every single one of those jokes like Pete Rose at WrestleMania 14 and just go, "How about it?"
That would have popped me. Because Pete Rose knew how to do it right.
Did you see the documentary on Pete Rose?
Of course I did, man. That guy's a carny. He's the
I
ultimate carny.
only watched episode 1 because I got too much of pro wrestling politician on it, and so I was like, do I really want to watch the rest of this when I look at baseball? Not to say that everyone in baseball is this great human being, but I look at baseball in a certain way that is very different from how I look at wrestling. So when I have baseball brain on, to see Pete Rose do his Donald Trump impression was really hard for me.
Yeah, he's a character, and I'm glad you quit after. It doesn't get better. He's a character throughout the entire run, and he never takes accountability. It gets pretty annoying after a while. I honestly believe he should be in the Hall of Fame, not because
I do too.
Not because of what he did or whatnot. It's just because there's people that have done worse or at most what he did, and they're in. So I mean, but that's a whole another conversation.
Also, you put him in, and then he can just shut up about it, and we'll be done.
Yeah.
So
he deserves to go in, man. He does.
I think so too.
Nobody's ever gonna beat his hit record. He's got other records. I forget which ones, but they're pretty impressive as well. And yet, for him not to be in, it's pettiness. It's pettiness,
As has been said before, it is not the Hall of Good People. It is the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
How many more? There's not that many more famous baseball players who are still alive than Pete Rose.
Right. Maybe
all right. Oh my God. I as much as as much as I dislike the Dodgers, I want to see 50-50, man.
He got another stolen base today. He's at 49.
Is he 49-49?
No, he's 48-49.
Okay. So what we got? We got a week and a half left.
He's gonna do it. I don't see why not.
Got to do it.
Yeah.
We haven't had one of those moments where it's okay, ESPN, we got to cut into whatever's happening so we can see if he does the 50-50. I guess when Aaron Judge was trying to hit 60, they were doing that. But yeah, we need one of those. And look, he's on the wrong team for me, but that dude is freaking amazing. For me, not for you, obviously, but for me, he's on the wrong team. But oh my God, that guy's amazing.
He should. Let me just say something controversial.
Okay.
He shouldn't win the MVP. I don't believe that. I don't believe that a DH. I believe that if you don't throw on a glove, you don't deserve the MVP. That's my belief.
So
I'm
Lindor,
very
you
old.
think Lindor's gonna win?
Lindor doesn't have the numbers. This has been a very weird year for MVP candidates.
Yeah.
I think he's at 268 at batting average, but uh, I would give it to Lindor. Yeah, because Lindor is actually playing complete baseball. You
Yeah.
give Ohtani the Silver Slugger award, I wouldn't mind. Any other award that measures any kind of position, like that's fine. But an MVP it should be a complete ball player, in my opinion.
So let me give you the odds for National League MVP award winners. Ohtani is a giant favorite, by the way.
Well, they love him. He's the MLB's darling, so he's gonna win it. I mean, we know
him and Aaron Judge have very wide odds to win the awards for their leagues. Lindor is number 2 at plus 700, and then it just falls off after that. Like those are the real 2 candidates according to the betting odds. Marcell Ozuna, who is also a DH, is 3rd in the odds.
He doesn't deserve it either.
And then you have Ketel Marte, Ellie De La Cruz, Jackson Merrill, who's a rookie, I believe, and Bryce Harper rounding it out. You're right, though.
Everybody brings the big Poppy argument into the game when we talk about this, but he never won an MVP as a DH, first of all. The one that killed it for everyone was Edgar Martinez, because he became, he established, he became a legend as a DH, and Paul Molitor too. But Paul Molitor played for years as a position player.
Just a bad one. He was just a bad.
Right. But and I've also heard arguments. Well, what about if Ohtani pitches in the postseason? I'm like, well, the postseason has its own stats. It's essentially a new season. So
I hope he doesn't, because man.
He's been throwing bullpen sessions, so I'm hope he does.
I don't want him to get hurt though. Not for fandom.
You do want him to get hurt because
for him,
I
want him to succeed. I think, as you know, I've seen a lot of Barry Bonds, and Aaron Judge is great. I still don't think Aaron Judge is comparable to Bonds, but Ohtani is the closest I think that I've seen since the Bonds years.
Right. And before we move on, because this is not a baseball podcast, I will say now with the way I'm thinking at my age and whatnot, and just hindsight, much like Pete Rose, Barry Bonds should also be in the Hall of Fame because he's got the numbers. Like it's so unfair, that he's not in it. And again, like you said, it's not the Hall of Fame of good people, it's the baseball Hall of Fame. But anyways,
you ever hear the story about why he decided to take steroids?
No, I haven't.
So 97, no 90, it's 97 or 98. Whenever the Maguire and Sosa thing, was being marketed as like baseball is back, because the post-strike 95 post-strike baseball struggled,
right?
And what brought it back was Maguire and Sosa and the chicks dig the long ball stuff. And them just every night it was like, who's gonna, they're each guy's hitting a jack, and they're cutting in. And so that off season, Bonds was like, I'm still better than those guys. Like, why am I not getting the same love from the fans and the community? And that's when he decided to do what they were doing. Like that was literally the decision was, I know what these guys are doing. They're getting all of this love and all of this acclaim. That should be mine because I'm better than both of those guys. And that was really the reasoning.
I don't know that.
Why he did it. Yeah. So
interesting.
He was just way too good on it, and he put a bullseye on himself. And he did.
Well, yeah. Well,
big.
and his body.
Big.
His body changed. His head got big, and so I think that was the big red flag for a lot of people. I'm just glad that we don't know, but I'm assuming that Ken Griffey Jr., one of my heroes, didn't succumb to temptation. But then again, we don't know.
As far as I know, like he's never been in those conversations. Guys like Will Clark never in those conversations. But your boy is the one who no one seems to really know, Piazza. Because he was kind of the same size for his entire career, which means either he didn't do it or he did it to get into baseball because he was such a terrible prospect.
Right.
But who knows?
We'll never know. But he's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Bagwell, like Bagwell gained the same 40 pounds that Bonds gained. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I know that dude wasn't just drinking
Both
milk
Bagwells,
all of a
Marcus
sudden.
and Jeff, they were both on the juice.
All right, last two matches of the show. I don't even know why this match is on the show, by the way. Ted DiBiase and Jimmy Snuka, they weren't involved in anything from what I can remember, were they?
No, but Ted DiBiase was always in the mix, and it was just a way to kind of keep him out there in public, you know. Yeah, he was always in the mix. So that's how it was back in the day. They would always put these random matches on, especially the buffer match before the main event.
Yeah. And then he cuts the promo at the end on Jimmy just so that Jimmy could do the Superfly splash on Virgil to pop the crowd. So then we get the main event, and I will say this, and you know, I'm very critical of pro wrestling, as is kind of my job, is to look at pro wrestling through a critical lens. And if I was, you know, doing the Meltzer thing back in 1989, I'm sure the lens would be way more critical than how I perceived it as a child and, or, you know, 12 or 13-year-old in 1989. There is still a lot of fun in this main event. Poor Zeus can barely walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, that is how limited he is. So what happens? Randy Savage is just on overdrive in this match. He's like, I have to be the one doing everything. And, you know, Beefcake is Beefcake, whether you like him or not. He's the same guy. It's sort of depending on, you know, how hard he's going to work, depending on, you know, who he's in the ring with. But Beefcake and Savage, I thought they did good stuff normally. You had Sherry at ringside, who was, again, going above and beyond the Call of Duty ringside. And then you had Hogan, and they saved Hogan for the end. Like, Hogan doesn't really get involved. How long is this match? This match is 15 minutes.
15, okay.
Yes. So Hogan doesn't even get in the ring, I think, until like 7 minutes. And then, you know, it's him and Zeus. You could see them go at it, and Zeus no-sell stuff. And, you know, I like Beefcake going off the top rope for the axe handle and just gets caught in the bear hug. Like, that's a great spot. And then you get to the finish, and, you know, lots of crazy stuff is happening with Sherry's purse. And the one thing that was unfortunate, I wonder if he got hurt for real, is Savage goes to the top, but there's like a little bit of I don't know if it's a miscommunication, but it looks like Savage maybe should have gone to the top a little earlier than he did. So when Beefcake pushes him off, Savage is basically jumping off to just get that spot done. And I was like, oh man, I hope this guy didn't get hurt.
Yeah.
And then you lead to the finish. Now let's talk about this finish, because for business purposes, probably not the right finish if you want to keep doing this match. But they have Hogan pin Zeus thanks to this loaded purse.
The loaded purse, right.
But it's still Zeus getting pinned in his very first match on WWF television.
They would never, now in hindsight, right? We have almost 30 years of wrestling since this day, and we know about booking, and we know how to protect heels.
More than 30 years. It's like 35 years.
Right. Hogan would never, he wouldn't go by that booking philosophy. I mean, even you could make an argument that Savage should have won at WrestleMania 5, or at the very least not lost the title.
Yeah.
There's so many of them, you know. Even in 91 with Slaughter, he pinned them clean in the middle of the ring, and somehow they continued the feud up until SummerSlam, even though it had essentially been blown off. So Hogan had, the way they would book Hogan was just to always win and then just continue the program like if nothing happened, you know. He did that with a bunch of guys over and over. Even Andre, he pinned them clean, and then he's feuding with them a year later at WrestleMania 4. So that formula was something that Vince would never do. He just did not like to beat Hogan. He just wouldn't. And so here we see it again. Now, the difference between all the wrestlers that I just mentioned and Zeus is that Zeus needed that, right? Zeus couldn't afford to lose like that.
Yeah.
He didn't have the promo skills. He didn't have the working ability to get himself out of that defeat. Whereas guys like Savage did, and you'd even Slaughter later on. And so I think this was the wrong decision. Maybe there's a part of me that thinks that Vince also, he saw this guy couldn't do anything, and he was just done with him, and he was just going to stretch it out. Because from this point forward, I mean, it's really only 2-3 more months, and then he's out forever.
Yeah.
I mean, never really comes back. So I think it was a combination of they would never book Hogan to lose ever.
Yeah.
And also just Vince probably being done with Zeus. That's it.
Yeah, you can't. You probably can't stretch this guy out another 8 months until WrestleMania anyway. That's a long time. So,
That was
because I
the
mean,
biggest fear.
the right finish, if you do want to save him, is just beating Savage. Or, they're not going to have the baby faces lose because you could have beat Beefcake too, but they're not going to have the baby faces lose on a pay-per-view. And then knowing that Survivor Series is always kind of goofy, and whenever they needed to get out of finishes with Hogan at Survivor Series, they just have him and the guy he's wrestling get counted out or whatever, and then they both go to the back. And so they could have creatively tried to get there, and then maybe you even have Zeus win the Royal Rumble, and to set that up. But I mean, what you're probably saying,
You're scaring me right now.
What you're probably saying is right. Is Vince looked at what he had and was like, "There's no effing way we can get this far. Like it's going to be like a 2 and done, and then we're going to be out of here."
Yeah. I think that's what happened. Because you also got to remember that this was also around the time, actually very much during this time, when No Holds Barred had finished his theatrical run. It was officially out of theaters. I think it ended up making, what was it, like 16.7 million or something like that. And of course, Dave, the hater, always has to remind us that the theaters get most of it. The percentage goes to the theaters. Vince doesn't really see. Even though we made a case for why that was a good investment a couple of shows ago, whether or not there was a profit margin, even at a loss, it was a good investment.
Yeah. This show did a crazy amount of buys.
Right. And so so with that in mind, I mean, I think Vince is like, well, that's it. And the only reason why Zeus stayed around a couple more months is because of the VHS release of it. The movie being released on video and trying to get that one last buy rate out of it in December.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you think, and we may have mentioned this already, I may have asked somebody else, but well, I'll ask it again. Just if we repeat, we repeat. But could they have done a No Holds Barred 2? Or because they bring Zeus in wrestling and you see Hogan beat him again, that is the No Holds Barred Part 2.
Yeah, that's one way to see it. Yeah. I mean, I don't think they were going to make another sequel. I just don't think
that would be one way to continue that investment. It's like, oh, we built up this guy, but then he probably kind of has to win the wrestling feud to make the movie interesting, which they were not going to do that.
Right.
All right. So Dave writes, after this show is over, he writes, last word I've got on WrestleMania is that despite what everyone is saying, it is probable that the event will be in Toronto. He's talking about WrestleMania 6. But the official decision has not been made, and the officials at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum are expecting it will be held there as well. So that's a whole year and a half early.
But that's interesting that's interesting how City's already bidding for it this early in the game. I mean, because he makes it, yeah, Toronto and LA. He states it in the Observer. They're bidding for to have WrestleMania. So this thing has been huge for a while. It's not something that just happened, I mean, even as early as 1990, there's already bids of like trying to get the show to come in.
All right, let's switch over to the NWA. This line popped me. Dave writes, he's talking about this new Halloween Havoc pay-per-view that they're going to do in October, and he says there's talk of holding a costume battle royal as part of the October pay-per-view. Please say it ain't so. And the reason why he thought it was a silly idea is because he said that just by mannerisms, the wrestlers, if you put them in costumes, the fans would probably know who they were because of size and mannerisms. And he's like, just don't even bother. Don't outthink this one. So that was the say it ain't so.
And they wouldn't, so they listened to him.
Yeah. Okay, Ric Flair. Ric Flair is now the chairman of the booking committee, which means he is the guy with the final say. There's no more committee vote. There's no more team. And Eddie Gilbert and Kevin Sullivan, guys like that, still have like lots of influence, but Rick is the final say. And what's interesting about this is because Rick is on the road and he is the guy with the final say. They basically have to take Eddie Gilbert off the road to be the office. And I always thought that was interesting. Like Eddie Gilbert, who was a wrestler as a babyface, he was in main event, not main event stuff, but mid card, upper mid card. He saw his vision, or he saw his future in wrestling in booking, and kind of forgoes his wrestling career for the time being to have to be Ric's partner in this endeavor.
Yeah, he had already had booking experience, I believe, in Memphis. And then Jerry Lawler was always his hero. Like, so Jerry Lawler being a wrestler and a booker, that was something that he always liked. And then in getting this opportunity, I mean, who wouldn't take it, right? That's where he sees his future. And I think he was very smart, because he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's also a guy that knows how to talk. And by talk, I mean kind of not just as a promo, but also just backstage, and really be able to navigate those political waters that Kevin Sullivan was so good at doing. So that's where he saw his future at. And he did the right move by really trying to, at the very least, get the experience of being in the office, which is something that he would do until the day he died, because then he would go on to like ECW, and then he would go to Puerto Rico to help book there, and then he passed away in Puerto Rico. So that's something that that was in his future, and he knew that, and he took advantage of it. And he's probably making the same amount of money too, which is even better, because he ain't taking bumps anymore.
Yeah. So now this show that you had mentioned earlier, it's mid-August, and they put on the wrong tape of the show that they were promoting all week. And it's not like it was the previous week's tape. It was 3 weeks prior. So you're talking about pre-pay-per-view Great American Bash. They put the TV building up to Great American Bash after the Great American Bash is already over. So talk about and this is supposed to be Flair's first TV taping under his new watch. So, and it's so silly, because so they don't really as far as I'm trying to read Dave's statement, and it sounds like TBS has no idea that this is going on until they get calls to the whatever phone line, customer service or whatever,
the switchboard, as they used to call them,
the switchboard. So then they realize, and they can't find the tape, and by the time they find the tape that they could have just switched in, the show's been over for 45 minutes. Like, how
just bush league, minor league stuff, man. And
my
it's like,
goodness.
Yeah, just embarrassing. There's no excuse. There's no excuse to have this kind of company. What it does is that it shows you the advantage that Vince had over these guys, because that would never happen with Vince ever. He was such a micromanager that he would make sure that if he had to fucking bicycle that tape himself, he would do it. I'm sure everybody was on vacation, or in Boca Raton, Florida somewhere, sipping a margarita. All these executives and whatnot, and then the wrong tape is being shown to and it's just embarrassing. It's even by 1989 standards.
We would never see anything like that today, but sometimes they'll play the wrong promo. Or on Dynamite tonight, which I haven't finished yet, they're playing the Nigel McGuinness promo on why he wants to face Bryan Danielson, and they play it. It doesn't work. 10 seconds go by. They come out of it. And then they play it again, 20 seconds later, and go, sorry, we screwed up. It's live television. That is about as bad as you're going to get. Sometimes there'll be sound issues with AEW TV, but that's really it. Like, you wouldn't see anything like that today. So at least
Vince never. But one thing about Kevin Dunn, man, he was a lot of things, but he knew how to do his job. Like you never saw that with his department. Yeah. Even all the way back in '89, you would never see. I can't think other than
they missed Elizabeth pushing Sherry over the top rope. That's about it. That's the only thing.
Yes, but that's that. Yeah, the cameraman probably got fired right afterwards. By the way, because that's how they used to do things.
Speaking of getting fired,
yes,
the guy who was in charge of this show, of the TBS wrestling shows, Tommy Edwards, he was the one who was blamed for the snafu. He was suspended without pay and will no longer work in wrestling, but may be reassigned elsewhere in the TBS empire. Tommy
probably did it
Edwards.
on purpose. So he probably did it on purpose. Then
That would be
he was like,
hilarious.
yeah, during his suspension, he threw a big party. You know, I'm out of that hellhole. I'm going back to covering the Braves. You know,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. The Robin Green storyline. Do you remember this one?
Yeah. I'm surprised they didn't bring it up with the Steiners during their biography special. They didn't even touch the storyline.
Well, I told you, because she passed away and she's linked to Benoit. That's why they didn't do it.
That's right.
But I remember watching this show, and at this point, you're talking about women in wrestling. The women who are actually wrestling, Sherry Martell, Wendy Richter, by normal standards, attractive women, but not like supermodels who they would bring in the Attitude Era and after. But they would not really dial up the sex stuff. I can remember like in '87, like I was like, oh yeah, Precious, she's like attractive, but she was also in like long dresses, right? She wasn't in sexy kind of clothing. Miss Elizabeth on the WWE side, always very classily dressed, very pretty. Missy Hyatt was a little bit more enhanced, we should say.
Yes.
And she would have her sexy.
Jim Ross's ex. That's right.
Yeah, but she would also have her fun, bubbly airhead personality.
Yeah.
This was like one of the first times where they actually was like, oh, we're just gonna put this woman in like some lingerie and have her come out. And I would like I'm 12, 13 years old. I was like, whoa, are we supposed to see this on wrestling? What's going on here? So that's my memory right away, is like just this change. And also, the poor dog-faced gremlin, we all saw it coming, that he was going to get, messed up. And this is going to lead towards doom, which I kind of like that feud. But yeah, this is a very memorable moment for me. And Robin Green, and she played a version of that character many times before, which I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have even put the two and two together until later. So but for whatever reason, this transition from the bubbly and sweet Robin Green to the sultry, sexy Robin Green, very memorable.
Yes.
Okay, here's a question. So Dave alludes to a feud with Missy Hyatt. So Dave says, he writes, there are many who are saying this is going to be a hot angle when it all is said and done, and will lead to a natural rivalry with Missy Hyatt. Okay, that's normal wrestling, which may be an out of the ring rivalry as well. What was he getting at here?
I don't know, but he would know, because he was dialed in with both women at this time, it seems like. So he would know. I think it was just that cattiness of the era. There was very few female spots, and so they're very protective of their spot, and so that's out of the feud. Unless Kevin Sullivan was messing around with Missy Hyatt and we didn't know about it, that's another reason. So
interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, maybe ask him, Matt. See if he remembers 35 years later.
I'll have to ask him. Okay, so there's also someone had wrote in and asked him if the name Robin Green is a spoof on Robin Givens, who was married to Mike Tyson at the time, and Mitch Blood Green, who fought Tyson, and then they also had a street fight at the same time. So I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
It makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
I mean, Rick is knowledgeable about stuff like that, so it wouldn't surprise me if Rick and Kevin decided that was the name because of what's going on in the real world. All right, there are two things outside of WWF and NWA that I'll just quickly mention because I thought they were kind of interesting. The AWA team concept. Do you remember this at all?
Yeah, that was towards the end, right? Yeah, they had this teams, and they had some weird, wacky ass rules, and I remember
a league. It was like a wrestling league or something,
right? It was just something to try to freshen up the television, but somehow it made it look older than it should have been, because AWA was always considered like the old federation, because everybody just looked older. And it was just by that point Vern had run out of money, so it doesn't matter how much ice cream you put on shit's still gonna be shit, right? So that's what he was trying to do at the end, just trying his best to like revitalize something with no resources, and it couldn't get over. You know, he would close shop 91, I think. So he was only 2 years before he would finally close it up.
The team concept, I don't remember watching any of these matches. I think I remember seeing like the idea on television, but I don't remember watching it. But the interesting thing is, in reading back, one of the folks who was going to be on one of these teams is Kokina, the Samoan, who would later become Yokozuna in WWF. So going back all the way to 1989, he's on folks' radar as like a prospect in wrestling. And why not? He's like a giant athletic dude.
Yeah, and at this point, he's probably only like 320, 340. If he's for his structure and whatnot, he's very light at this point. So, and he could move. So yeah, and he would get the gig. He would get to WWF in 92. So he's only 3 years away. So yeah, he's on his way.
And then the last thing, I always thought this one was interesting, and I don't know if I thought that it was going to be a fresh version, but World Class becomes the USWA. Probably not the best idea to brand or take the World Class branding away and give it new branding, because that World Class branding still meant something to people. But
I don't know about that. I think this is very much similar to the Ring of Honor AEW thing. I mean, at this point, I feel like it would benefit AEW to just call it AEW ROH if you want to, but you definitely want to brand it as an AEW production. It would help tremendously. So I think that's the World Class was so damaged by this point. I mean, they were so scummy and carny, with the heart attack.
Kevin Von Erich is like no showing like every week, like just
yeah. At this point, they're done. The Sportatorium ain't drawing nothing, and to me, I think Jerry Jarrett when he bought it from Kevin, and I think Kevin was so disheartened because I don't think Fritz ever really approved of that, and it became a whole thing. But at this point, Kevin had he had the power to sell it, so he sold it to Jerry. And I think I don't blame Jerry. Jerry's like, my brand is the one that everybody knows, and I'm gonna stamp this thing with my brand, and that's what happened. So for a while he was running Texas and Memphis. All
right, now we will get to our segment only in the Observer.
How's it going, everybody? Dave Meltzer here for the next 2 hours. We're going to be talking pro wrestling.
I love it. Okay, the Ayala days.
I have a 4, I think, for you here. One of them is kind of funny. Let's start with this one. And so, because Vince McMahon now has movie gravitas, right? He's made a movie. I don't think this stuck, and maybe it wasn't even a thing. But Dave writes, WWF jobbers are called extras, like in movie terminology, not jobbers anymore. That didn't stick. That they're still.
I mean, they have extras now, but extras as in you're gonna do backstage work, not
right.
Like the one guy that got launched by Bronson Reed earlier. that he was an extra, But I don't think the jobbers are considered extras. Or I think they were always enhancement talent, right? Enhancement talent. That's always the official term.
All right,
because one thing we got to give Vince credit. I mean, he's a scumbag, right? He is. We know that, but he really tried to avoid all that carny terminology. Like the only time I've ever seen him talk in, like when he told the Warrior that it's a work gym, when Jim had to do the apology video for that kid. That's the only time I've ever heard Vince say it's a work, Jim. It's a work. but if you notice, Vince rarely uses that kind of language. So I don't think he's gonna be calling anybody jobbers. I think he liked to call them enhancement talent.
All right, here's another one. They had an interesting twist to a hair versus hair match a few weeks back in Mexico City, with El Dandy wrestling Emilio Charles Jr.
Yeah.
The match ended in a double countout, and both wrestlers wound up getting their heads shaved bald. And as we said, in the last one. Sometimes he'll put two stories right together back to back, and they're not related in any way. The very next sentence is El Satanico is turning babyface in Mexico. With that name?
I would like to know how they split the payoff, because usually the guy that gives up his hair gets the most money because you're giving up your hair. But in this situation, since they both lost their hair, did they split the payoff? I don't know. I've never seen anything like that. That is wacky. and El Satanico being a baby face with that name, yeah, that is weird. But I don't know how these stories go together. But that's Dave.
Yeah, there's no link to these stories.
That's Dave being awake at 4 a.m. trying to finish the Observer to take it to the post office.
All right, we've talked about this before, where Dave could be really, really mean to some
Rick the
wrestlers.
Stick.
So he writes, Dusty Rhodes pinned Barry Horowitz. Rhodes now wears yellow spots on everything: his knee pad, his tank top, and his trunks. This must be a rib, because according to a woman's magazine, spots make one look fatter than one really is and should be avoided by anyone who is even the slightest bit overweight. I don't know if it was the spots, but Dusty looked even fatter than before. That's only half of it, but I want you to I want to hear your thoughts on that half.
Well, I mean, Dave has always been very vain. I mean, he's always been a body guy. There was this old Observer back in the 2001 days. I don't know if you remember this episode. He starts telling Brian that he had a nightmare. He said that he woke up and that he was fat. And that was the nightmare. And but that was 2001 Dave. You know, so Dave has always been very much a body guy. So just the fact that he's, trying to clown on Dusty, that doesn't. Plus, he doesn't like Dusty during this time, even though he's named his kid Dusty's kid.
Yeah, they had it up and down.
Do you know if they ever were they friends? Do you know if they were friends at the end, or
Dave and Dusty? Yes.
Yeah,
I think they were. The interesting part about their relationship is Dusty was like the one that he picked on the most, and he picked on Dusty in the NWA because he thought Dusty was putting himself before business when they could have been a true contender with WWF, and Dusty was just wanted to be the star and did not look at the company before himself. And so then it was all about how lazy Dusty became and how, he when he wasn't the top guy anymore, he was like, kind of mailing it in. And
right.
But then, and I think about this, and I've actually asked Mike Tenay about this. Dusty Rhodes as an announcer was bad.
Yes.
But he was entertaining bad. And there's a match on I think it's on Wrestle War 91. It's two Japanese women. It's Miss A and Mickey Honda. And Dusty's like, the English language never evaded somebody so poorly than it did in this match for Dusty, because he's just off the charts. But I was actually talking about to Mike Tenay, and he called Mike Tenay, like when Mike Tenay would come on we're talking like 96 WCW, like Mike Tenay wasn't on all of the matches. He would come in when they would bring in like an international match, and he could explain who these wrestlers were and why this was important. Mm-hmm. And so Dusty and Tony Schiavone, like Dusty's just goofing off the whole time. But then Mike Tenay comes on. It's almost like Dusty has to sit up straight because he knows like the real wrestling guy is talking. And then he would give Mike a nickname. He'd call him Iron Mike, and he'd ask him all these questions. And I asked Mike about that, and I was like, what did you think about that time frame? You're really, really early in your career, but you're taking wrestling very seriously, and Dusty's kind of joking. And he was just like, that was just, you had to respect Dusty for being Dusty, and I didn't mind the nickname. Did it make any sense? No, because I'm not anything like Mike Tyson. So maybe that was part of the joke,
Iron
right?
Mike. Yeah.
Iron Mike. But
he used to call Sonny Ono Sonny Bono, so there was no rhyme or reason to his the nicknames that he would give you.
But I will say, I did enjoy the commentary, but I imagine Dusty goofing off during matches like today, I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much because
Well, it
again,
was like Gorilla, right?
through
Gorilla
it.
Monsoon is also very charming, and he's also
Yeah.
wacky, and
Yeah.
but he's also not somebody that puts the match first or even
I
the
guess
storyline.
I guess it's kind of like how Booker T calls NXT these days. That would be
Right.
kind of comparable.
Same old thing. Same old thing. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So more on Dusty. I don't know if this is intentional or not, but with the police hat and the nightstick, because he's feuding with Big Boss Man.
Yeah.
The bleach blonde hair and grossly overweight frame. Dusty.
See, why does he have to say grossly? Like, why? Why? I mean, come on, Dave. Grossly.
Dusty looks almost exactly like Dump Matsumoto.
Jesus Christ. That means he's also burying her because he's saying that Dump Matsumoto also looks like Dusty.
And then he writes, "Too bad he can't work like her." And that was that was the end of it. Isn't is Dump Matsumoto? She's the subject of the Netflix series that just came out, right?
Yeah, right.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to watch that.
I saw her wrestle what I thought was her last match. You never know with these people, but when I was in Japan in 2016, I went to an FMW show, believe it or not. It was a revival show, and she was there, man. I was marking out big time because obviously I grew up with her tapes and all that stuff. So yeah, I got to see her in a legit Japanese promotion in Japan. So I'm looking forward to this documentary. Yeah, and the Vince one too.
I think it's a TV series actually. So it's like a fictional series. It's not like a documentary on her.
Oh man,
so
I'm not looking forward to it anymore then.
Well, maybe it's good though. Maybe it shows you
if it's from Japan, I'll give it a shot. If it's an Americanized version,
I mean, I imagine they're going to show how insane it was for those women to train back then, right? Like that's got to be part of the premise.
If they show the Crush Gals and all that stuff, that would be pretty cool.
So what about this for Netflix? You have this series, I think it's called Queen of the Villains or something like that. And also they put season 1 and 2 of Heels on Netflix, which is the wrestling show.
Mm-hmm.
And then next week we got the Vince doc, and this is all predating WWE. So I wonder how much other wrestling content they're going to put on there, because I know the Heels guys are kind of hoping that their show takes off and that Netflix is interested in bringing them back for season 3. This is kind of interesting what they're doing with the wrestling content. I'm wondering how it's going to work.
They also have the OVW documentary on there, that 7-part, which I loved, by the way, but nobody it didn't get any steam. Nobody saw it.
Yeah, I never saw it.
It's awesome. Yeah, you're right.
Is it Al Snow?
Yeah, it's Al Snow. Yeah, and he's being wacky, and one of the Basham brothers is his assistant. So,
oh wow,
yeah. But yeah, it's interesting how they're putting a lot of wrestling content on there.
Yeah.
You know? They need to rent the Iron Claw from the rights from Max and put it on.
They should. They definitely should. I'm sure Zaslav is waiting to sell the rights to that thing.
To everything, really. When you hear about the way he is.
All right, 2 more. Andre the Giant was arrested on 8/21 after an incident in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Andre was charged with assault and criminal mischief when he accosted cameraman Ben Hildebrand after his 30-second main event with the Ultimate Warrior. According to the AP report, Andre shook up the cameraman, giving him a few bruises and knocking his back out of whack, and did $300 worth of damage to the camera when Andre thought the reporter was filming his match with the Warrior. Hildebrandt was told not to film the match, but was given permission by Titan to film crowd reaction shots during the match, and the reporter claims he had his back to the ring when Andre attacked him. So Andre is mad because he believes this guy is filming what is a terrible match for his career.
And it's probably like 15 seconds.
And they're not showing any of these matches on TV, though they will run a version of this match on Saturday night's main event, from what I can remember. And the reason I'm trying to remember when that time frame is, because there was a Saturday night's main event that I missed, and I think it was that one. And the reason why I missed it is because I was so tired, because I think I had like a baseball game that day, and I was so tired. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take a nap, and then I'm going to wake up at 11:30 when Saturday night main event comes on. I think it was like set the alarm clock wrong or something, and I slept through the whole night.
Right.
And I didn't set the VCR because I was going to wake up. And I was so mad that I slept through and did not get to see Saturday.
Well,
like,
you're gonna
really
get to see
angry.
It soon. You're gonna get to see it soon because we're gonna cover it.
Yeah. So I don't think I've ever seen it, so it'll be the first time.
And they also did that finish at Survivor Series '89. He was the first one eliminated within like 5-10, literally the same finish.
Yeah.
And that's the classic match where, well, classic in quotations, where Andre goes back and says, "Oh, what up?" And then years later, The Rock would like imitate that Andre from that particular night, which popped me. So yeah, we'll cover it too in November. But yeah, so I think Andre was just hurting at this point, physically, mentally.
He didn't look good at all.
And he's just taking it on people at this point.
All right, I saved the best one for last. This was at the end, and so I couldn't tell. Like, there's the Observer. Dave would save the letters from the readers at the end, but then sometimes he would get a last thing in, and I couldn't tell if it was him writing or if it was like a reader question. And then you kind of like, if you read through it a couple of times, you go, okay, this I think I know what this is. At the very end of the issue, he writes, "This isn't a joke. On Friday, I got a phone call from the Star." I think he meant Star Magazine.
Yes.
And maybe it was called The Star in '89, but that's what he said. And he says, one of the newsstand tabloids like the Inquirer, wondering if I could corroborate a story they had about Jane Fonda dating a pro wrestler. Jane Fonda wasn't dating a pro wrestler. Jane Fonda was dating the man who bought the NWA.
Right. Our hero and yours, Ted Turner.
My goodness, can you imagine that they were thinking that she was dating, because she's got to be in like her 40s or
but she was very attractive for a long time. I'll just say that.
Yeah. So, but but yeah, he's like, and then he goes, "I didn't answer the call, by the way."
Yeah. Jane from Hanoi, or Hanoi Jane, as Vince McMahon would call her later on, and doing those skits, Billionaire Ted skits.
Yes. All right, so we're done with that segment, and I did want to ask you about some of the things going on in wrestling today. The first thing, the TV stuff. What do you think about the rumored numbers as far as what Warner Brothers wants, or what Warner Brothers is going to give Tony Khan for his content? And then there's also this outside thing with the possibility of like Fox Sports or something getting a show as well, broadening that and adding different shows maybe to have different ways to keep making money on content. Though the John Oran wrote that the Warner Brothers one is only 3 years guaranteed, so that may be them sort of seeing the future of cable and thinking that everything may have to be on streaming at that point. But what do you think about all that stuff?
I think it's not just for wrestling, for TV, for movies. I mean, we're right in the middle of this phase of like transition and evolution, right? And so it's very difficult to predict anything because things are changing so fast, especially with like streaming rights and whatnot. But I mean, it's gonna make the company profitable, which is good. I mean, 170 million a year is the figure, the amount, right?
Yes.
And so that's going to put the company in the black right there, which is, I want everybody to hear this. We all benefit from that. Please understand that. It's not, us. I mean, you could question Tony Khan's booking all you want, and I do all the time. There's things I don't like, there's things I like, but at the end of the day, it's nice to have alternatives. And we all win as wrestling fans. It's funny because I don't know. It's hard to criticize TK sometimes just because the bottom line is the bottom line, especially once this deal goes through. But it's still concerning because I think as we're going through this evolution, there's still kinks in both, not only WWE, but also AEW that we have to work out. Like it's a fact that AEW's product is not connecting with the audience right now. We know this. But because of the way television has evolved, they're going to be okay. and so is Triple H. Let's call it spade of spades here. I remember when Vince first came up with that SmackDown Fox deal, it was a big thing, right? Everybody was saying Vince was a genius. And Dave always said, Dave is like, Vince is a product of the time. It's not so much that he's a genius, is that he kind of walked into this time where television was changing and networks were paying, incredible amounts for sporting rights, right? Because sporting rights, they're at that time, they're DVD-R proof, supposedly at that time. And so Vince kind of walked into that and he got that big offer. It's the same thing with Tony Khan. Like Tony Khan is also a guy who's taking advantage of the era that he's in, right? Because he's getting opportunities that, for example, an Eric Bischoff wouldn't get, or a Paul Heyman in '92 or even 2001. So yeah, we just have to, but it still makes it difficult. How do we critique the product then? Because at the end of the day, it's a cold product, and I'm thinking, are we going to have, even though he's getting $170 million a year and he's okay, is he going to be performing in front of a studio audience? Like, are we going to go all the way down to maybe 500 paid? Like every time he goes back to the same market, he's drawing less and less people, and it's getting harder and harder to hide that on television. I mean, he's had a couple Dynamites where they had like 2,000 in there. That's ridiculous. So it's going to be interesting to see, because my concern is that TK is very much so hyper-focused on the television contracts or the streaming contracts that he's not paying attention to his product. To him, it's like, well, look, I got 170 million, I'm good, but you're not good because all the other metrics are down, And with television, one thing we always forget is that they could always cancel you.
Yeah.
It's not, yeah, they give you the 3-year deal, but if you're not cutting it after year 1, you're out of the air. And we see that happen to shows that are more valuable than AEW. So we're going to see what happens with that. I'm happy. I'm happy that he's going to get that deal. And when it goes through again, it's going to be all about having more alternatives for longer years, wrestlers making more money. But my concern is, what is he doing about the staleness of his product? He's not changing anything. He just won't do it. He's very stubborn in that way,
You said, you don't know if we can criticize him. Well, you can if you saw him on NFL Films wearing a neck brace and talking about taking pile drivers as if it was real. You can criticize him for that.
Yes, right, correct.
Okay.
But let me say a little more about just, there's a lot of stuff that for the wrestling industry, not just AEW, that's connected to everybody being profitable because of these ridiculous contracts. We also heard Mark Shapiro say that there's going to be less house shows, which is interesting. We have that whole thing with Triple H's insistence of only having 5 pay-per-views per year. To me,
5 matches, you mean?
Oh, 5 matches. I'm sorry, 5 matches per pay-per-view or PPR or whatever. To me, that smells like we're gonna have future roster cuts, because you don't need, you only need a certain. If you're only pushing a couple of acts on TV for the 5 matches, and you're no longer doing house shows, some of these guys better start changing their phone numbers. That's all I gotta say. But not only that, it's and then AEW never goes on the road, so they're just, so it seems like we're going through this era of where we're going to have wrestling become a television product, exclusively a television product. And I don't know how that's going to change, like the way the wrestlers work, the business, how connected we feel with them, because we can't go see them live anymore. And so we're in for a very interesting time over the next 2-3 years, not only because AEW is going to be profitable now. We'll see what he does with that. I mean, TK is the type of guy that's going to make 170 million, and he's going to all of a sudden budget his company to 200 million. This guy's always going to be losing money. You know what I'm saying? He's just going to start bringing. so that's concerning to me. And because I mean, for better or worse, the guy has been profitable. He just hasn't made a profit because he's always overspending. But he's drawn money, and that's a fact, especially with the pay-per-views. So I think we're in for a change. It makes me a little sad, not only for the traditionalist in me. I like to see these guys work because you become more polished when you're working every night. But also, I don't know. I don't really like both companies do this where they have because there's such limited time for television, especially again Triple H doing the whole 5 match per pay-per-view thing. I'm tired of seeing these guys disappear. They come and go. They come and go, and it's like both companies are doing. Tony Khan was doing it first, and then now Triple H is doing it too, where you see if you're not in that pay-per-view cycle, he just lets you go home, which is good for the wrestler because they get to spend time with their family and heal. But it sucks for the fans because it's like, how do you build momentum?
Here's a good example of what you just said. I don't know how much I believe this to be the case, but some people thought that the Hangman and Swerve program actually helped the ticket sales to All Out and maybe even pay-per-views. We'll see on pay-per-view. If they did for the pay-per-view, it seems like it's not that much. But so let's say you saw that crazy-ass angle on Dynamite. You watch that crazy-ass match, and let's say you like that crazy-ass match, and you were like, oh, man, I can't wait to see what happens to Swerve. He's on vacation.
He's not around. He's not around.
So that is, if you got sucked in because of that, and you're like, I'm back. I now want to see what happens with Hangman and Swerve. And it's like, well, now you get Hangman and Jeff Jarrett. And I'm fine with Hangman and Jeff Jarrett for a small program for whatever it is. Jarrett's gonna make it as good as he possibly can.
Right.
But now Swerve is, who knows when he's coming back. I'm guessing maybe for Wrestle Dream he'll come back and be a surprise there. But if you did get invested because of that reason, they basically told you, don't get too excited because that dude's gone.
Right. Same thing with Toni Storm. Toni Storm also vanished. Once her run was over as champion, she was gone because she's not part of the plans right now. There's countless wrestlers. Sami Zayn, when he lost to Braun Breaker, he disappears for a month, then he comes back and wants a title shot, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I didn't like that.
Even though I understand the logic, he beat him at WrestleMania and this or that, but he's not a contender. He hasn't beat anybody to earn a world title shot. Forget about the wrestler he beat. Let's talk about the title shot. If this was real, it's more about the title than it is about the wrestler that's holding it. So he hasn't done anything. So I mean, Bayley just came back recently after vanishing so it's all about just, there's no momentum there, and I think both companies are starting to rely on that way too much. And it's also, there's this expectation, like, it's like, okay, once I finish my big run, I get to go home for 2-3 months, it's like, why? I mean, business is business,
Yeah. And like you said, if you're not really going on the road, you are already home a lot,
Yeah.
You only have to go to one TV a week, and that's basically your whole thing, and you're home for 4 or 5 days. So it's not like, that's the big reason. It's like, oh, they need to go home for 2 months. They're kind of already home the way that their schedule works. So
right.
It's just that the story that Tony is writing, he's trying to set up a comeback to get them back to being over again, because the surprise element, and that's kind of a way for him to get wrestlers over again, is to bring them back as a surprise. So
yeah, but then again, why not do Vince used to love to do this, and I agree with Vince. He used to write people out on Raw the next night. You have the gimmick where Swerve comes out, he's limping, he's got the makeup on. Although with that match, they really didn't need any makeup because they really fucked themselves up. But you cut that promo, right? And then Hangman lays them out, or whomever he was in a feud with, somebody lays them out on that Wednesday. That way, at least we get the promo after the match, and we also get that, we write them off, and everybody gets what they want. The people that got hooked in because of that match, they get to see some sort of promo afterwards, and then he gets to go home for however long he's going to go home. That's how Vince used to like to do it. Now, they don't do it like that anymore. They just vanish.
So let's talk about the crazy match. So we had All In, and then we had this great moment of Danielson winning the title, and his kids are in the ring. I thought that was a really good job of what they did there. And then I was like, oh, now they can do that old Flair storyline before his retirement with Shawn Michaels, where the idea was the next time he loses he was going to have to retire. So you just had to build all these wins, and 2 counts matter because you don't want to see him lose. And I thought they were going to do that same thing with Bryan Danielson, who faces Jack Perry at All Out. And then and then he gets basically put a plastic bag over his head by Jon Moxley. And now I don't know if we're going to get 5 title defenses for Danielson before his last full-time match is his retirement match or whatever. So
I hated that. I hated that angle.
We saw it. We're gonna see it. We're gonna see
it. But
soon.
With the Funk and Flair, but it was different. It was different, and I'm not saying I'm a big fan of that one either. I think there's always this thing, this subconscious thing where we're watching something, right? Specifically wrestling, and once there's this, emotionally and even like mentally, we kind of give them license to entertain us, right? And we suspend disbelief and everything's okay. But there's always that point where it gets too real, you know what I'm saying? And it's almost like it gets us out of our trance of being fans. And that's how I felt for both that angle and then the match afterwards, that steel cage match. It was like, I remember Jim Cornette said this, and Jim Cornette, whatever, is Jim Cornette, but he did make a good point. He was like, if you're gonna do angles like that, why not just bring a gun? Why not just bring a gun and shoot the motherfucker? Because at that point, what does it? You already crossed the line. Like you already crossed that line. I remember even when Omega brought that screwdriver and he was trying to kill Mox in that match they had years ago. Like I don't like seeing stuff like that because it really kind of it takes you out of being a fan and it reminds you of like the real horrors in life. Like these things happen. And that whole bag thing, but even forget about how I didn't like it for that reason. The execution was horrible for a major league company. Nobody tried to help this man, even though he's dying. At that point,
stretcher for him. They just drag him out.
Yeah. Was this like an indie show at like a like a fucking like a gym somewhere, like a high school gym? Also, Wheeler Yuta, they didn't even respect this guy to beat him up. They treated him as a 16-year-old kid who has a man crush on Bryan Danielson.
That's how I saw it too. People were saying, "Oh, the sympathy." We just felt so bad for Wheeler, and I was like, "No, Wheeler's not even fighting. He's crying. He's crying. A coward. He's not a hero."
Yes. So they treated him as a little kid, right? And Bryan Danielson is his father, and there he is crying. They didn't even take the time to lay him out because they don't respect him enough to lay him out. That's how bad it was. And from what I understand today on Dynamite, I haven't seen it, but they continue that. Somehow he comes off as a kid again.
He's got to be their tag team partner for next week.
Oh,
because they got the trios belt still.
Yes. So again, Barry Wheeler Yuta, Barry fucking the company for not having anybody come on and save Daniel Bryan. They can't even afford a stretcher. And I just didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. Why didn't Christian cash in when he was half dead? Christian leaves and he could have come back and just pinned them. Isn't that the rules? So all these things just rub me the wrong way. The fact that Christian's at the top of the card somehow because he happens to be TK's buddy, that bothers me. This guy's 53 years old,
He's a politician, man. He
is a politician.
He's got it all figured out.
We'll give him credit. I remember Dave and Brian were doing a show about a month ago. And Brian casually and jokingly said, "I hope they don't put the belt on Christian." And they freaked out. They was like, you don't think that you don't think they will? And he's like, no, I'm joking. He's like, "Are you sure you're joking?" "Yeah, I'm joking." And then he's like, "Because they're boys. TK and Christian are boys. So there is a possibility, I guess. I mean, that would be horrible because, I mean, I love Christian. He's revitalized his career, but not to be in the world title picture, and he's been there way too long. So
look, man, this dude, from what I understand, may have had some troubles losing to Swerve the first time. Just about what he thought should have happened in that match. So
right.
Look, and this is the wrestling business is a dog eat dog world, not a doggy dog world, but a dog eat dog world. And that's how those guys survive. So if you have an edge because you've been around the business for that long and you know how to manipulate people, and that's going to help you make the most money, I'm absolutely for that. And I get it. And I always liked the joke of when Dave used to write about who the smartest person in wrestling is, and it was all based on who the best politician was.
Well, I think Dave is the smartest person in wrestling, but we'll leave it at that for a lot of reasons.
But okay, so you didn't like the cage match. I didn't like it either.
No.
So here's my problem with it. It's not about a singular spot. My problem with that match is you started the match. They were running each other into the cage. They're already bleeding. They're bringing out stuff from a tool bag. And the fans sat on their hands because they knew what those guys were doing to set up future stuff was not even a big deal, because what they were going to eventually get to was the rear horror stuff that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And so we saw the brick that they had to take suplexes on. And then they busted out the syringe, and he stuck him right in the cheek with the syringe. And so, to Jim Cornette's point, it's not exactly Jim Cornette's point. I understand Jim Cornette's point, but similarly to his point is when the fans are numb to everything, the next time those guys do a match like that, you have to go bigger than the syringe in the mouth. So, what is bigger for the syringe in the mouth? Is it a superplex off of the top of the cage and through a table to the floor? Is that where you have to go bigger to get that same crowd pop from the fans? I called the fans bloodthirsty, and that's kind of because they just can't wait to see like the next crazy thing. Right. Meltzer in the Observer called them treating the wrestlers like cattle, which I thought was an interesting way to say it.
Yes.
And so that is my problem with the match. It's not really this match. It's, because we should have learned this with Mick Foley, right? Like Mick Foley was the teacher. He's the one who taught us, like, you can't do that, because then what's the next big thing that you do to top that one? You can't.
Right.
And so I don't know what they could possibly do to top that without worrying about the safety of those dudes, because I like both of those guys. I really like them both. I just didn't like that match.
Right, and it gets less and less safe. Whatever you have to do to top it is going to get more and more dangerous, and that's my concern. Like, when does it end? I think Cody and Solo, even though I don't like Solo, I think he's got no heat as a wrestler. He's a dead wrestler. But they showed us how to build to a good cage match, where they took risks, but it wasn't like life-threatening or anything like that. And so I think that's how you do it. You save your shit for, like, not that stuff shouldn't have happened regardless. The whole needle thing, the cinder block thing, but they did it, and now how are they gonna have it? How are they ever gonna top that? They're not. They're gonna have to do something more dangerous. So that's why I didn't like it. And AEW has been doing stuff like that a lot lately, just very careless stuff like that. And we'll see. I mean, I understand Tony Khan. I mean, he's second place, and second place, they tend to do stuff like that traditionally, right? Over the years, we see that they work out of desperation sometimes, hot shotting a lot of the times, and we've been seeing a lot of that lately. But eventually, it's going to hurt them in the long run, and I think we're starting to see that.
Where are you with what WWE's doing for Bad Blood? We're going to get a Hell in a Cell match with CM Punk and Drew. I just hope that
I'm done with that feud. I'm done with that feud.
Well, this should be the end of it, right? They gave us an extra month of this thing by adding this stupid bracelet thing, which some people still really love.
But it was like we were talking about earlier with Zeus and Hogan. It's like Drew already beat him clean. He tapped him out and he beat him clean. Why is there another month of this? Well,
because they need to bleed.
But it goes right back to I see Paul's Carney booking. I see it now. It's like, this guy. I joked about it after WrestleMania. Now it's becoming fact. This guy literally has one idea, and that's to use The Rock against Cody at WrestleMania 41. And everything in between, he's going to do a patch job. And that's exactly what he's done. All these B shows, which are essentially like glorified in your houses at this point with their 5 matches.
I have this conversation with some WWE fans who are really loving the product. And I'm like, these shows are so predictable, and there's nothing happens. Like,
They're house shows.
I'd rather watch Raw because at least something happens. A story happens. No, this is the greatest. This is the greatest time in wrestling. WWE's never been hotter. These matches are great. I'm like, yeah, I see great matches every week. What's
they're riding the wave. They're riding the wave. I mean, that's good for them. They're riding the wave, and the wave, as we learned from WCW in '98, like it takes a while for that wave to come down, right? And so, but it will come down. But no, I see the patch jobs he's been doing. You know, Cody against Kevin Owens, trying to convince Kevin Owens to get a title shot, like that was ridiculous.
I didn't like that at all.
Bringing AJ out of mothballs out of nowhere.
That was awful. See, we're in agreement on this Triple H Cody booking.
Where is Cody's feud? Where is his blood feud after Roman? Like they don't have a heel that he hates. Solo, and then don't get me started on Solo Sikoa. That's another angle where it's like
you mentioned AJ. They brought him out from mothballs, and then he lost the match, and he's now back in the mothballs.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. I mean, they would have done that with Nakamura too, but they used them earlier in the year, so they can't use them again. And who knows where the hell he's at? But not that we miss him or anything, but still, I mean, he's not around.
Surfing. We know he's surfing.
There you go. So I'm thinking, why wasn't anybody set up for Cody? You know, why, you know,
my entire problem with this Cody reign is they
had
an opportunity to do something really cool, and they just decided not to.
Right, and that's because Paul's like, we're gonna ride this out to WrestleMania 41, and he's doing it. He's already halfway there.
Yeah.
But even with this bloodline, man, like a couple of weeks ago, we saw Roman literally squash Solo Sikoa. I don't want to see a one-on-one match with them because there's no reason to. Solo has no need.
It's no reason.
They never protect this guy. And not that it matters because he obviously he can't carry. He's not good on promos. Not a good wrestler. It's all tailored towards Jacob Fatu. But we have to keep on seeing Solo just be involved, and he's not that good, you know.
He's like the baby face of the tag team, who just gets beat up because you need to keep one of the guys strong. But you also need someone to take a lot of the punishment, and he's that guy. Even though he's like in the main event spot on the heels, he's also the guy who takes all the punishment.
Which is weird. It's bad psychology. It's weird to see the leader is the one that takes all the punishment, does all the jobs and all that stuff. And the enforcer, which is usually the guy that takes all the punishment and does all the jobs, he's the one that's over. It's just weird. It's weird booking and weird psychology. So I think that's hurting that program.
Yeah, it's like Flair is getting his butt kicked and losing all these matches just so that Arn Anderson doesn't have to get beat up.
That's right. But the only thing there is that Arn would be better than Flair, and that's not the truth. Whereas in this case, Jacob is a lot better than Solo Sikoa in every which way.
Yeah.
So I think what's hurting that program is that we're all waiting for Jacob Fatu versus Roman Reigns. That's the one where we all want. We got to get through all this gaga, which is it's going to get harder and harder to get heat on because eventually Roman's going to run through these guys like he's been doing every weekend.
Did you like the Mega Powers Part 2?
Well, the Mega Powers Part like 10 because that's another played out trope. I was telling Danny, I was like, watch them win the tag team titles because every tag team that can get along, that's in the main event scene, that's about to face each other, they always win the tag titles. You know, they did it with Undertaker and Austin back in the day. I think they did it with Shawn and Cena in 2007. It's always the same trope, and here we are again with doing it one more time, you know. So we'll see what happens. I also noticed that there is like some rumblings, very, very light, but I noticed on social media that there is people that are starting to notice about these 5-match PPLs or whatever. So I don't know if Triple H is going to change it. He might change it on this one, right? Because I think he has 6 for this one.
If the Nia match, if we get a Nia match, I think that would be 6.
So I think,
but because it's very SmackDown light, I think this is like a heavy Raw show, from what I understand.
Right. So I think he's going to go to 6 because I think there's already some rumblings of fans not being happy with these 5-match pay-per-views. And we'll see. I'm cool with 6. I mean, 6 matches is nice. The only reason why I don't like the 5 is because it limits a lot of good workers from getting on pay-per-view, and that's where you have the great matches. And we never see Bronson Reed on pay-per-view, and he's awesome when you allow him to cut loose. We never see like Sheamus, and he's a good worker. There's so many. He's got this system now where he's got his TV guys and he's got his pay-per-view guys. And if you notice, they never really interchange them. Like Andrade hasn't been on pay-per-view. He's been specifically on SmackDown, having good matches with Carmelo Hayes. So I think opening one more slot at least. I'm not into like the TK having 25 matches on pay-per-view either,
Yeah.
As we learned from the last 0 hour, I mean, some of that stuff is pointless. Just don't throw it on. But
it was really the 0 hour. It was like less than 0 hour.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more into just give me a balance here. Give me 6 good matches, even 7 for a big show. Because I do like how he trims out the fat, which is good. But this whole 5 business, I don't know. I don't like it because again, it limits a lot of the good workers from getting on pay-per-view.
What's going to be interesting about this show is it's the first B show that they'll have done in the US in a long time, because all the other B shows were done internationally. So you had all these crazy crowds who were loving everything that they did. Now you're back to the US crowd, and they may not be as just vocal for everything. So I think the show is going to have to be better than some of these other B shows that they've done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they give Gunther and Sami Zayn some time, they're going to have a good match, because they had a great match at WrestleMania. The tag match is going to be intriguing with the Bloodline against Roman and Cody. I think Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan, they have the storyline going for them. The match might not be that good, but they have the storyline that's over.
Storyline's hot.
Right. And so that should get over. Damian Priest versus Finn Balor. I don't know about that match, because I don't think people see Finn having a chance. So we might have a dead crowd for that one.
That one's going to be tough, I think, for sure.
Yeah. Unless they give him credibility before the show, which I think they still have a couple episodes of TV for that. But I mean, he would have to beat him. I don't know if you want to do that. Because right now he's just gonna go in there, and Damian Priest is gonna go in there and just beat him, And then what else do we have? If we have Nia versus either Naomi or what was the other one?
Bailey. Yeah,
Bailey.
Loser has to be off of SmackDown or something like that in that match.
Yes. But they've already announced that she's going to defend her title at the pay-per-view. This is just another story. Well, Bailey and Nia had a decent match at SummerSlam. I don't know if they're going to rematch them, or maybe they're going to go with Naomi just because she's a fresh opponent for her. And that's it. I think that's the card. Oh no, and then you have the Hell in the Cell, which should close the show. It should close the show. It depends what they're allowed to do, and it depends. I mean, every time I worry about CM Punk that he's gonna pull something or break something every time he wrestles. But there again, I mean, and I know this is just the hardcore fans, because not everybody watches both companies, but when you just watch Swerve and Hangman, I mean, what are these guys gonna do that is gonna top that, and it affects the quality of the match too in a lot of ways. So even though it's not their fault, but still.
What if Punk goes under the ring and he starts pulling stuff out, and he pulls out this bag and it has a bunch of syringes in it, and he's like, what? And he just throws it to the side.
He would do that. He would do that. Yeah, he would definitely do that. But yeah, that would be funny. No, I think Punk has to win, because they have already set up Gunther and Punk possibly for Survivor Series, which would be a big match in my opinion. So that's kind of where I see it. I don't know who Gunther drops the title to. It might be to Punk, because you want Punk going in strong into that WrestleMania season. And maybe if Punk beats Gunther for the title, then Seth Rollins comes back, and that's your title program.
It's natural. It's a natural. Yeah, that's a natural transition to that match. All right, the last thing I wanted to ask you before we get out of here. Did you by chance see the NXT Rocky 3 cut that's been going around Twitter?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so you'll want to check it out. So basically, there's a storyline with Tony D'Angelo and Obafemi. So in this story, Tony D'Angelo is Rocky from Rocky 3, and Obafemi is Clubber Lang.
Okay.
And so basically the story they are trying to tell is that Tony D'Angelo is scared of Obafemi, and they take lines from the conversation of Rocky and Adrian at the beach where he tells Adrian that he's afraid.
Right.
And it's like they take like the whole thing. Like it's real. Like if I'm Sylvester Stallone, I'm like, you guys better give me a writing credit for this episode because you just stole lines that
Line
are
by
in a
line.
very important, like a very popular movie. So I just wondered if you saw it.
So I mean, Shawn Michaels is a big fan of Rocky 3, is what we could deduce with that.
And then we had Sami Zayn and Chad Gable and Gunther, and that took a lot from the Rocky series as well. So yeah, someone's doing a lot of watching of old movies. I don't know.
Well, remember the first time we caught that was way back about 10 years ago with Roman and Brock 1 at WrestleMania 32, where that was literally Drago and Rocky. That was the match, and they even did the spot where Brock starts bleeding and he freaks out at his own blood.
Yeah.
Like Drago does in his match,
Yep.
So yeah, there's been a long list of fans, writers, creatives in WWE for the Rockies franchise.
I mean, it's not a bad franchise to steal ideas from because it's very successful, but still, like
it's a sporting event.
It's so blatant that it was kind of ridiculous how blatant it was.
One thing before I go that I did watch there's two things that I watched over the weekend that I hadn't watched in years. One was the UFC.
Oh wow, you watched the UFC from the Sphere.
Yeah, I had not watched the UFC since 2014. Any show, maybe a couple shows here and there in the later years, but certainly since the Fertitta sold, I hadn't watched anything.
Yeah.
Very nice. I love the production. Now I know that was rare for the Sphere. I know it's not all shows are like that, but I like the little movies they were playing.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed the fights. It was nice to see the fights, and I also watched the Canelo fight. I watched both of them back to back. And one of the things that I really forgot, because growing up Mexican, I grew up with my dad. He's a big boxing guy. So there was a time where I was like dialed in. But I forgot how beautiful of a sport boxing is.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot just it is the human game of chess. I say baseball's that, but really boxing is really that. And just the way like Canelo was baiting this kid, he was toying with him, and just how you saw how like you have to think 2-3 moves ahead before and you have to execute, and it was amazing to see, and it really reconnected me to how boxing could be such a great sport,
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that that's high level. I understand that not all boxing is like that. If you watch like those lower level boxers, they might not be as polished, but it's still something that was cool to see, and it reminded me of how great boxing could be when it's promoted right,
Yeah, no,
and for what I understand, that wasn't even that wasn't even like a great match. It was I was just watching,
Canelo's letting these guys hang around when he should be demolishing these guys. But boxing, I'm not saying that it's going through a renaissance, but I think because the Saudi Arabia money is so involved in the sport, and the money is so big that you're getting matchups that we wouldn't normally get. So if that continues to be the thing, you might be getting some of the matchups that we weren't getting for whatever reason. But at the same time, boxing, the sport in of itself, from the how does someone grow into a Canelo, that stuff seems like it's not working as well as it possibly did in the past. So that's a part of the sport that I think needs some work. But the UFC show was very interesting. I didn't like the fact that all those fights went to all the way to the end.
Right.
But the Sphere was amazing, man. And I was talking to Dave that night, going like, I know they couldn't do it monetarily because no wrestling fan's going to pay $1,000 to just be a part of the thing. But a wrestling show would also look tremendous in that building.
Yeah, but at the same time, I do wonder, is it really that expensive? I mean, you have to allow these acts to make a profit. You can't. I know that. Well, I don't know the number that they charge UFC, but there comes a point where you have to somehow allow these acts to be able to make some sort of profit, and so I don't know. We'll see. Maybe later on, as the years go by and it loses its luster a little bit, they'll start lowering their prices to allow like WWE to go in there, So because I would go for sure. I would definitely go for that. Because just imagine WWE prides itself in production, and having that kind of setup right there, it would be amazing. It would be amazing. So I do have a couple questions here. We'll get to them really quick and then we'll get out of here. Peter H asks, who drops the title first, Gunther or Cody? Well, it's going to be Gunther, because Cody's taking it all the way to 41 unless he gets hurt. And like I said earlier, I think Gunther to Punk is what seems logical to me at this point.
I actually like that a lot.
And then it says here, who does Bryan Danielson drop the belt to? I think it's going to be Darby. I mean, that's the guy I'm thinking, in Washington.
So you think Darby's going to actually beat Mox in New York?
Yes, which we wouldn't even get to how dumb that angle was, by the way. It doesn't make zero sense. How like what's his name? The guy that's coming back from injury, the announcer. Nigel. Somehow Darby's gonna fight for a shot that he already won. It's dumb, and then somehow Nigel's gonna wrestle Danielson, who already had a match, but it's not gonna be for the title. It's just I understand what he was trying to do, but it wasn't executed properly.
I don't think so either.
Do you think fans will get tired of the Triple H 5-match format? We already talked about that.
I'm already tired of it, by the way.
Why are you? I mean, I don't consider you like a traditional Mark, and we've had these conversations before. Like I feel like you don't have no like race in the game, or horse in the race, as they say. So why don't you like the five-match format?
Because nothing happens on these shows.
Okay.
Like
so
I watch wrestling for conflict resolution. Now, you're not going to get that in every match. So I watch for you're building up a match, and when you build up the match, and when what happens on screen is what you promise in the build up, then I feel like, okay, that was good. I don't feel ripped off. But when CM Punk has Drew in the move in the GTS, and he spots a bracelet on Seth Rollins's arm, and he drops Drew to get this bracelet, and then he loses the match because that's not what they promised me in that match. They promised me a knockdown, drag out, bloodthirsty.
They promised you blood and guts is what they promised you.
And then they gave you Toys R Us. And so when I get those, now the WWE fan of today will say, well, they're just progressing the storyline. No, duh. As if I don't know that. But that is manipulation in the way that they do it. So
I agree with you.
If you do it in a way where you deliver what you promise and you still advance the storyline, that is good booking. When you did it the way that they did it, I thought that was patty cake. And I was like, this is so stupid. And yet the WWE diehards ate that shit up like gravy. And it was amazing to see the response of the people who are holding so near and dear to their heart about how great Triple H is and the stuff. And when I say not everything can be great, because if everything is great, then nothing is great. So we actually do have to, have to like look through a little bit more of a critical lens. But at the end of the day, if those people are happy, hell, that's half of the thing, man. Like if you're watching a show and you're happy and you feel like you invested 3 hours and you didn't waste any time, then so be it. I feel like I kind of wasted time, and when I feel
the problem is that there's people that aren't happy, like you and me, and we're the people that are gonna. Well, not me, because I'm a freak that way, and I always will be. But you, well, maybe not you either, because this is your job. But somebody, if we're not as invested, me and you, we could easily be like, oh, this B show, I'm gonna skip it because nothing happens. Yep. And then you have enough of those people, and that's when the bubble starts to burst, right? And we've seen it. Yep. So for all the WWE fanatics, it's not that we're being haters, is that we're actually trying to look out for the product and be like, look, if you don't provide constructive criticism, then you can't see the mistakes we're to improve on, and this bubble is gonna burst sooner than later. Because more people are gonna start skipping it, and then that's where you're gonna have less tickets being sold, and then here we go again. So it's all about just trying to be, be focused on the things that could be done better. And like you said, I'd rather watch Raw because that's where the angle advancements are, and we're gonna get some use out of that, right? Whereas on pay-per-views, it's just literally a house show. You go to a house, you're watching a house show on TV, and I'm not cool with that, So hopefully, Bad Blood changes that, and then Survivor Series is gonna be a big show, so that doesn't matter. They always something always happen on these big shows. But that's Paul's booking philosophy. I mean, I bet you if it was up to him, he would cancel the B shows and just go back to like a 5 big show format. I could totally see it, by the way. He would do that. He just probably can't. Because these shows are all throwaways. They're all throwaways.
Just have a Saturday night main event be your B show.
Yeah, and then that's another thing. People are excited, but we saw it back in the the mid 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where it's like they start off hot, and then it just becomes a C show. They'll have like the C show guys in there, and then it just becomes a throwaway show. So I expect the same thing to happen.
Yeah, I think what will happen is they'll save whatever the big angle is for Saturday Night Main Event, which means that Raw and SmackDown will probably be not as good that week.
Yeah.
So, but it's a lot of TV that we talk about AEW and having Collision and Rampage and those shows not carrying anymore. Saturday Night Main Event is on broadcast television on NBC on a Saturday night. People go out on Saturday night. Not everyone is home. If you're not delivering them, something that's worth of value, they're not going to pay attention. They're not going to give a shit. So
even if you do, we live in that a la carte society, right? Where it's not like before. Before me and like you said earlier about the Warrior versus Andre match.
I was so mad.
You skipped it, and there's no way for you to see it ever again until 30 years later on the network. Yep. But for today's society, they're just gonna go watch the highlights on YouTube. It's right there, you know. Or they'll wait for it to be on Peacock, and I'm sure it will because it's the same station.
Now, the one difference is these shows will be on in prime time versus the 11:30 or whatever, old SNL time slot. So that is different. So there will be more opportunity for eyeballs. But again, that's a hard audience to try and grab, especially because that day is normally PLE day. So there's an expectation of if I'm going to give up 3 hours on Saturday, it better be that quality. And then if you just need your wrestling fix, well, Friday Rampage, Saturday Collision, and then you may just go, that's all I need, and I don't need to watch this thing at I'll watch it later, like you said.
Right. Well, I mean, it is another interesting thing you just brought up because over the last couple of years they haven't had a PLE on during December. So that this might be making up for that, Maybe they still won't have one, and they'll book this like a PLE, which would be great if they did. So we'll see what they do. But I'm interested. As long as Jesse Ventura is not on commentary, I'll be good.
You're probably only getting 3 matches, though, is my guess, if it's a 90-minute show. So
that's fine.
And that's totally fine. Oh, you'll probably get a big it'll probably be very similar to the old one. Big opening match, big angle coming out of that match, and then 2 quality matches after, and then you're done. Yeah. With recaps of everything that already happened.
Right. Because they love to do that. Recaps.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Was that the last question?
That was it. Yeah.
All right. So September, there's a Clash for us to watch for September. And then October is Halloween Havoc, the very first Halloween Havoc ever.
Good show.
And then November will be Survivor Series, and then December will be that match from the match in the movie. So there's probably another Clash sprinkled in there somewhere.
Yeah, so we've already made it more than halfway. We haven't. I mean, it's too early still, but I don't think we're automatically going to go into 90, right? We've talked about other ideas. I would love to go back to 84 just because of Dave's book that is coming out, and also there's not a natural a big show every month. We'll probably be mostly talking about TV and house show angles and stuff. So that would be a little bit of a different thing. I don't know if that will be as easy. That would be fun for me. I mean, I don't get a lot of chances to talk about 84. So, and it was a big pivotal year in the wrestling industry. So we'll see.
Okay.
We'll
all
see
right.
what happens.
All right. So for Draven, I am Double G. We will see you when we see you. Peace out.